right, thank you for joining us, everybody. This is another Alchemiculture episode. I'm your host, Phoenix Aurelius, and today we are joined by Jerry Marzinsky. He is an author and a psychologist, I guess technically a retired psychologist. He's done many, many, many other things. Today, though, we're going to be chatting about some of the most pertinent information that I've seen from him as it pertains to our modern society, and we'll draw some lines and parallels into this, but it really comes down to his research, having worked in clinical environments with the prison systems, particularly with schizophrenic populations, and how he came to various realizations that there's no amount of modern medicine that is going to be able to really address or treat schizophrenia at its root cause. And he's come to some very interesting conclusions that parallel my own conclusions, having worked with people in a clinical environment over here with my research program. So I'm very, very excited to introduce to you Jerry Marzinsky. Jerry, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're more than welcome. I'm glad to be here. Like I said, I've never met a real alchemist before, so this is a treat for me too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally.
And it especially surprises me because I'm both fists in the face of the pharmaceutical industry here. Give them a kick in the butt every chance I get after watching the damage that they do to these people.
Yeah, seriously, absolutely. So, let's actually dive into that a little bit. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your experience having worked with, as a psychologist, having worked with populations of schizophrenics and what that drug use looked like and what the general psychiatry method was with the psychiatrists that you worked under, and just kind of some of the things that you ended up noticing.
Whoa, where do you want me to start?
Well, let's start with your actual experience. First of all, how did you get involved working inside of the prison system as a psychologist?
Well, I didn't start off with the prison system. I started off in probably the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet at the time, back in the 1970s, mid 1970s. I finished graduate school. I did a kind of an internship at Central State Hospital at the Yarborough Psychiatric Rehabilitation Center there after graduating from the University of Georgia. And then, they had a job opening there. They had staff dorms because Milledgeville at that point, it was in the middle of nowhere. And, I was interested in mental illness, but from what I saw, they just had this big listing. And, the first time I ran into an abnormal psychology course was at Temple University. And I was just fascinated. And I had no idea why. But it was just this listing and description of these different mental illnesses. And I'm thinking, like, what makes that happen? What makes them do that? What makes people crazy? What are these things? It was just like, but they didn't have any real causes that seemed to grip anything. It was, oh yeah, it could be family. They blamed it on the mothers. They blamed it on the genetics. They blamed it on a chemical imbalance, and that's what they were pushing. Is this chemical imbalance theory of the brain,
right?
All through college, all through graduate school. And I'd read about all these different mental illnesses, I soaked all that stuff in like a sponge. And they give us these different readings. So one time they assigned in the abnormal psych class, they assigned a reading of research done by one psychologist. It was a paper that he wrote. And I didn't know how bogus these papers were that most of psychology puts out. It's like 60% of them or more than that are not replicable.
Yeah.
So I saw the published perish stuff. The academics have to publish no matter what. They publish garbage just to get it published.
Yes.
So they gave us this one paper, and the guy said if two psychotic patients met each other and they had the same delusion, one of them would have to give way. One of them would have to change his delusion to something else. So if one of them said he was they both thought they were George Washington, one of them would have to change to Abraham Lincoln or something. And I'm thinking, that didn't even make sense to me as as an undergraduate. I'm like, why would two lunatics who are both nuts have to want to change delusions?
Yeah, there's no causation to
what do they do? Have a conference and decide on who's going to change? No, you turn to Abraham Lincoln. No, you do it. I like being George Washington. It's like, what's behind that? It didn't make any sense to me at all. But I remembered it. It burned in my brain. I said it was almost like one day I'll be able to check this out. And I just tucked it back in there. And I've done that with a lot of stuff. Coming through psychology and counseling, this doesn't make sense, but one day I'll be able to check it out. But before I could ever work with a clinical population, I had to have 6 years of college. I mean, they got these populations sealed off, so people can't get in there to research what's going on. You can't just walk into a mental hospital or a private psych hospital or a mental health center and say, hey, I want to do research. Oh no, it's too dangerous. It's against our policy. You might get hurt. It's dangerous in here. Oh no. So, over close to 40 years of being on the front lines of mental health in all these institutions everywhere, state hospitals, private hospital, mental health centers, the state prison, private. I never saw a single researcher anywhere in any of those clinical settings, and they would not let them in.
Yeah, because it's usually just psychiatrists who are oftentimes having short one-on-one sessions with some of these.
Very short.
Yeah, very short. Having one-on-one sessions, writing down a couple of notes, seeing if there's any progress between their last session and this session in terms of lack of delusion or lack of voices or lack of whatever, and then cycling through various different antipsychotics.
You got it right.
That's been my experience of seeing populations of clients that I've worked with, and ultimately they always end up getting off their meds.
Yes.
They'll cycle on for maybe a week to a month, and things will actually, the first 2 weeks are terrible. They have tons of side effects. They're extremely drowsy. They're not even in their own body anymore, just kind of on autopilot. And then after that, they start to regain some of their faculties, but then the side effects are actually so poor that they decide to stop the drugs. And then sometimes there are the symptoms that they had before they started with an even greater intensity for a while. So that's typically what I think.
Hold on to that, because I did research that too. But to finish this, the two guys with the same delusion.
Yeah,
it was like maybe 15, 20 years after that happened. I was doing rounds on one of the psych wards, and there was a fellow there who was talking to himself, and you could hear it was like one side of a telephone conversation. So here I was taught that the voices are hallucinations, and hallucinations are random. They're all over the place. But this guy was carrying on a coherent conversation.
Yep.
With the voices. So I kind of crept up behind him, and I'd listened to him, and it was like one side of a telephone conversation. So he saw me watching him. I went up and introduced myself, and said, Jerry, I'm the psych for this unit, and you're new. I haven't seen you before. What's your name? And he goes, well, I'm Jesus Christ. And okay. I looked him in the eye. I said, no, you can't be Jesus Christ, because I'm Jesus Christ.
And I'm sitting there. You're like, I'm doing the psychotic. I'm like eliciting this.
I'm glad no staff heard me that day, but we were out in the middle of the psych ward, and I'm looking at him. He's looking at me, and he's like, he thinks about it, and I'm sitting there. I'm bated breath. Saying, okay, what's he going to do with that?
Yeah.
And then he comes back and he looks at me and he goes, okay, we can both be Jesus Christ. And he just scrolls off. I said, they lied to me about that. What the hell else did they lie to me about? And I had all these other things that I couldn't check out, but that one. So my mistrust for what I was taught, I mean, I always mistrusted authority. I mean, I was raised that
Yeah.
way as a kid. I mean,
Yeah.
all the things that happened to me made me extremely mistrustful of authority.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, and I was always in trouble in school for that. Because I would always question, and you're challenging us, and I had to kind of back in. And the higher you went, the worse that got.
That's absolutely true.
So, there was that mistrust there. And then with the medications, okay, they pretty much taught us that medications were the only thing that was possible. And that's the only treatment was possible. Nothing else worked.
Yeah.
But what I saw was exactly what you said. When I got on the front lines with the psychiatrists and psych nurses, I started asking them, why did they go off their meds? And they would say, well, because they're crazy. That's what they do. That's what schizophrenics, that's one of their symptoms.
They just write it off. Yeah.
They just write it off. And it's like the other big one was side effects. They don't like the side effects, and that was true. But while I was at the state hospital, I saw the worst of the worst, and florid psychosis looked so much worse than the side effects from those meds. I mean, they were totally out of it. They were seeing monsters come through the windows. People were stalking them. They were seeing shadow people come into the room. They were hearing voices tell them to kill themselves. They couldn't sleep. They couldn't eat. They were paranoid of everybody. So they just drugged them senseless just to keep them under control. So it didn't make any sense to me why they were choosing to be psychotic and totally insane over the side effects of meds, which were awful. I mean, they were awful, but they weren't as bad as being totally floridly psychotic.
Yeah.
So I decided to do a test myself, and I was working in the Yarborough Psychiatric Rehabilitation Center there. So our job there was not only to stabilize them, but to give them a vocation, give them some cosmetology, auto mechanics, janitorial, some skill, work skill, and then release them and get them out of the hospital. So it wasn't just stabilizing them and let them sit on the ward and walk around. It was trying to get them to be productive in society. Now that's a whole different ball game than just giving them meds and shutting them up and letting them walk around.
Yeah.
You're preparing them to have to function, and that wasn't working real well. Even though we would track them, and sometimes they made it to the 6-month limit where they were considered a successful closure. But most of them never made it that far. They would go off their meds well before that. So if they went off their meds 3 times, my treatment team had a kind of thing. If they go off 3 times, they're not going to stay on them. So we're wasting our money on this one. Let's put somebody else in who's going to stay on the meds. So one day, this one gal she was just about to graduate from cosmetology, she went off her meds a 3rd time, and we were about to discharge her. And her mother calls and says, please don't do that. I can't handle her. I'll come up there. We'll talk her into it. We'll find out why she's going off her meds. Please, she was virtually begging me. And I felt bad for her because I knew what she was going through. I felt bad for the girl because she was about ready to graduate and she blew it.
Yeah.
That was the 3rd time. So I said, okay, come on up. And she drove up from Southern Georgia. And one Friday afternoon, we met with the girl in the office. But prior to that, trying to figure out what was going on, I'll have to get back to that story because I didn't finish the first one. So I would pull the ones who went off the medications into my office, and I'd say, why did you go off your meds? And virtually every single one said because of the side effects.
Yeah.
I said, okay, here, I'll give you a piece of paper, write down all the side effects you had to your particular med, because they didn't all have the same ones.
Yeah.
So they'd write down a handful of side effects that were bad. And they didn't even realize most of them because psychiatry never told them about it. So here's all these bad things happening to them that they don't even know what it is because psychiatry never told them about the side effects or the dangers of those drugs. They just, it'll make you a little groggy. You just keep taking them, you'll feel better. And in about 2 weeks, you'll get used to being groggy. And they didn't tell them anything else.
Yeah.
So they just generally feeling bad. They were able to pick out specific side effects. And then I went to the DSM and I got like 2 pages of symptoms of being floridly psychotic and added a few of my own. So after they would fill out the sheet of side effects, I'd say, give them those other 2 sheets. I said, here, check all these symptoms, these horrible symptoms that you had when you were in a psychotic state. So they checked those off. After they did that, I'd give them both back to them and I'd say, which one's worse? 100%. Being psychotic is much worse than the side effects. And then I'd ask them, well,
So why'd you get off?
Why'd you get off? You know, guess what they said?
The voices told me to.
Well, not at first. That took 7 years to get to that.
Okay.
Most of them would say, I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know. And I'm like, well, if they don't know, who does? Because psychiatry certainly doesn't. Psych nurses don't. They have to have the answer somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, what is it? You know, so 7 years of that. My last year at the state hospital, then what you just said. I pulled that girl in, her mother came in, and her mother's begging her, you know, why do you keep going off your meds? You're about to get, and I'm saying the same thing. So you're doing good, you're making good grades. Well, you're in your meds, you're about to graduate. Why'd you, you know, they're about to throw you off. Why'd you do it? And she said, well, you're not going to believe me. I said, well, try me. I've been working in this strange place for 7 years. I don't think there's anything you're going to tell me that's going to shock me.
Yeah, right.
Matter of fact, I could tell you a few things that would shock you. And she goes, all right. And she said, you're not going to believe it. I said, okay, try it. And she said, the voices told me to. I said, the voices told you to. And I said, well, what did they tell you? They told me that the psychiatrist was poisoning me. And they were pointing to the side effects that those medications were giving them, which were toxic side effects.
Yeah.
So psychiatry was in fact poisoning them, and the voices were pointing that out. You know, so all those toxic side effects they're from being poisoned by those medications. Now, the only reason those things work is because they calm the patient down.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, exactly. They tend to slow down the amount of delusions and tend to act somewhat as antidepressants, because as far as I understand, most of those are just monoamine neurotransmitter, they're modulators in one way or another. So they might, you know, increase dopamine, slow down serotonin, stop with norepinephrine, things like this, in an attempt to try and change brain functions and neurotransmission to the point where they think that that will stop the delusions. But you found, just as I found, that doesn't really cut it. That's not the thing.
Well, in probably 95% of the cases. Now, I have seen some. I remember one that just blew me away. I mean, this guy was floridly psychotic all over the place. And this is very, very rare. They put him on these antipsychotics, and the next day he's completely normal. In fact, you know, but that's a very rare, very rare.
Yeah.
For the most part, they still hear the voices. It doesn't get rid of the voices. Their sexual dysfunctions interfered with. They can't concentrate. They can't think on these meds. They can't get anything done. They lose their motor dexterity. They lose sexual functioning. There's this agitated sedation. I mean, it's just like you're tired, but you're sedated and anxious at the same time. Then there's, the neuromalignant syndrome. What they actually do is they shrink your brain. I mean, they destroy your peripheral nervous system and destroy your brain. So here's the autopsies on these people coming in, and all of them are finding that schizophrenics have shrunken brains. So they publish that, and the pharmaceutical industry goes, oh, no, it's not due to our drugs. It's due to the schizophrenia. But there was a one-to-one correspondence between these autopsies with the people with these noticeably shrunken brains, and they're taking neuroleptics. So the drug companies are, no, it's the schizophrenia itself. It's this disease that is shrinking their brains. It's not our drug. No. So they did it with rats, and the rats had shrunken brains. And then they did it with monkeys, and the monkeys had shrunken brains. And then they compared twins, one of them on antipsychotics and one of them not. And the one that had shrunken brains. So what they're finding out is over 60% of these people that are on these neuroleptic drugs for more than 6 months are suffering permanent, irreversible brain damage.
Wow. Yeah.
And they, what do they call it? Neuromalignant syndrome, Parkinsonian's type effects. And it past a certain point, it's irreversible. And they don't tell the patients. I watched them in the prisons. I watched them in the mental health centers. I've watched them in the medical hospitals. I watched them in the private side. They don't tell the patients any of this. Matter of fact, I don't think half of them know themselves.
That's true. Yeah.
So this gal said, yeah, the voices told me that they were poisoning me. And then something else clicked in, because when I first got to the state hospital, I noticed that the psychotic patients were attacking psychiatrists at a rate, like 5 times higher than any other staff. That it was a rate that was just slightly under that of attendant staff that are around these people 24 hours a day.
Right.
And I saw how much time they spend with them. It's like you said, it's like a shotgun effect.
Yeah.
They go in with their shotgun and they go, well, I think number 6 shot will work, and they boom, and they fire it, and they call them back 2 weeks, and well, how you feeling? How's your meds doing? Oh, well, I'm still hearing the voices. Okay, well, we'll have to put in another round and increase it, and they just drug them until they end up with a chemical lobotomy, where these guys are like, they're walking around shuffling. They're kind of like zombies.
Yeah.
But it's a shotgun approach. And they go, oh, we think this will work, and we think that'll work. And I'd ask every psychiatrist I work with, well, what causes schizophrenia? Well, it's a chemical imbalance. But then I noticed that before they dished out any of these toxic medications, they never took any kind of test. No blood work, no lab work, no EKG, no EEG, no nothing, no kind of test to find out what was out of balance or by how much. And I think there's like 300 different neurotransmitters in the brain. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain is.
Yeah.
I found that out later. But I was very suspicious, like, okay, if it's a chemical imbalance, why are you just going in there and, kind of, it's like, they spin the wheel and then put you,
this one,
see how this one works. And if this don't work, we'll try. So then they cycle through all these things. Well, Thorazine doesn't work, we'll try Melware. Melware doesn't work, we'll try Seroquel. And it's a bam, 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 all the way down the line until they find one that the patient kind of, okay, well, I can barely tolerate this one. And asking them what, well, they don't have any tests. I found out they don't have any tests.
Yeah.
And I'd ask the psychiatrist, well, then what do you know? What are you treating? How do you know? What's out of balance? The pharmaceutical industry tells us. That's like letting the fox in the hen house. What are you talking about? The pharmaceutical, and that's what they all do. So I mean, all the hospitals I worked in, the pharmaceutical representatives come in, these cute little gals with, hoagies and sandwiches, and come and listen to my spiel, and we'll feed you good and give you a bit. And so everybody would be in there. And then they have all these, graphs and official looking things. And there's no way for any of us to check that stuff out. We just got to take their word for it.
Exactly.
We found this, buy this new drug, it's like, so the psychiatrist, we'll try it out. And that's how it goes. And that's how it's going all over the country, and even in all over the Western world, really, because I'm hearing some horror stories from Britain.
Oh, yeah. Britain has been equally as bad, if not sometimes worse, actually, than the United States.
Oh, they are worse. So. They are worse.
Yeah, and I mean, it's protocol as usual in most of the European countries as well. So, it's, and that's because of the quote unquote peer-reviewed science that, of course, has been more or less just hijacked by the financial model. And it has really nothing to do with actual science. It's very selective in what they choose to release and the spin that they choose to release it with.
Yeah, they influence the research. They warp the research. They won't publish studies that show that these drugs they're some of the most dangerous drugs on the planet right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they cover all that up. They're making over $3.7 billion a year just on antipsychotic drugs alone.
Well, see, it sounds like you've actually had some experience with at least one individual that you just mentioned who was able to take one of the antipsychotics and see some improvement, significant improvement. with any of the research clients that I've worked with, that has not ever been the case. And I probably have, maybe 200 of these under my belt that I've worked with directly myself over the last 15 years. I have not been able to find a single one where any antipsychotic medication that they were put on actually helped with their symptoms. Now, I'm not just working with, schizophrenic population. I've worked with, things along the same line, like multiple personality disorders. We're also working about mania, bipolarity. We're working with, massive manic depressants. We're working with, lots of different types of populations within this thing. But it stands to reason that when they're saying it's a chemical imbalance, specifically of the monoamine neurotransmitters, which are the main ones that are responsible, that they theorize are responsible for mood and behavior, that there's only 5 of those. There's histamine, serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, or noradrenaline, if you're in England, is what they would call that there. So those are the only 5 monoamine neurotransmitters. It seems like if it's a chemical imbalance, the way that they postulate, that it would actually be somewhat simple to bring this back into balance.
Well, from what I understand, those are components of antidepressants in a lot of cases. And what it does is it's serotonin reuptake inhibitors.
Yeah.
So the nervous system will destroy serotonin once it's used. It'll break it down. And so what those things do is they prevent the reuptake. So it keeps triggering the nervous thing, but the nerves. So it's an artificial firing so that this nervous system doesn't become as depressed. But especially with what was that one that they put out, the famous one. I mean, a lot of people were killing themselves after taking that. And it's just a Band-Aid. All those things just cover symptoms. They don't cure anything. None of them. They're just putting a Band-Aid in. With psychosis, it's putting a Band-Aid on a festering sore. But I don't want to hit them as hard as you have, saying, oh, they're totally worthless. No, I mean, I've seen improvement. A lot of times they will improve. They become functional. They're not as irrational. They're not as violent. They're more controllable, but it doesn't cure anything. So the great majority of them are still hearing voices, but they're not as loud and they're not as often. But they're still having to put up with all those horrible side effects.
Side effects, yeah, exactly.
And we have other ways of treating schizophrenics. I mean, the program Sherry come out with, the stuff that we're putting out on our website. So in a lot of cases, you have to use those antipsychotic drugs to bring them down to the point where you can actually reach them.
Okay.
And then put these programs in where they can start working their way out. But just using those alone doesn't work. The voices don't go anywhere. They're still there. As soon as they go off the medications, the voices come back, like gangbusters. So it's an important component, but it's not, what is it? It's like epoxy glue. You can't just use the rosin without the hardening.
Yeah, there you go.
It doesn't work. So you use the rosin and it kind of gums things up and slows them down, but you need the other component to actually make it work.
Yeah, to make
so,
it.
And that other component is a spiritual component. It's like they have to understand that these voices are not hallucinations. And that's what psychiatry has been telling them. And after this entire career, I mean, we've got probably some 27 repeatable, consistent patterns that these voices run. And if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Now, you just alluded to the spiritual component and some of your takeaways after your entire career. From your perspective, what does it look like? What is that spiritual component, and what is at the root cause, based on all of your study and experience, of schizophrenia in particular?
Well, for decades, I thought, first I believed what they programmed me, that it was a chemical imbalance. But then when I ruled that out, For years, I thought it was a part of the subconscious that had broken loose. I didn't believe in any kind of mystical craziness stuff. I thought it was a part of their mind that had been damaged, and most of them had suffered horrific abuse, physical, sexual, emotional. I mean, that kind of horrific abuse is often a part of, the schizophrenia component. And while I was working at the state hospital in Georgia, I noticed that my schizophrenic patients on my ward, when the preacher was doing a social event down there, where ice cream and dancing and cake and that kind of stuff, he'd invite them down there. He'd give a little sermon and then turn them loose. All the schizophrenics on my ward just stayed there, staring at the ceiling or sitting in their chairs, or kind of watching TV. They wouldn't go down there. And I'm like, why? So I started asking them, I don't like preachers. I don't want to be around. I don't want to listen to that church stuff. There is no God. That's a bunch of bunk. And then I'd look at what they were reading on their bedstands, was like murder mysteries and war stories and all this negative stuff.
Yeah.
And then I watched what they were watching on television. It was, negative stuff. And I'm like, what's with that? You think there might be some positive stuff in there with it. No, it was all negative stuff. I'm like, well, what is that? Why is that? And then one day, I think one of them told me, well, when I go to church, the voices get louder. And I'm like, that's odd. So I started asking the others, if one of them told me something, I wouldn't just trust one or two. I mean, I'd start asking dozens. Does this happen to you? Does this happen to you? And I got in trouble for that at the state hospital, because the voices don't like people asking about them.
Yeah.
They want to stay hidden. They don't want anybody asking it. And some of the patients would get upset when I asked them about their voices. And I ended up in front of psychiatrists twice being told, voices are hallucinations. Don't be asking questions about them. You're upsetting these guys. I got enough trouble on my hands without that. You stop asking questions about that.
And they say that it validates the hallucinatory experience for them.
That's what they were saying. Well, you by asking them questions about it, you're treating these things as if they're real. And what you're doing is reinforcing their hallucinations, and you're making them worse.
Yeah.
And I knew that was a bunch of crap, that you can't talk to those people. You can't say, oh, no, it's not. No, it is. I mean, that's what I've been taught. That's the way I know. I'm the psychiatrist. Who's the psychiatrist? Me or you?
Yeah.
I've had that happen too. It's like, so yeah, I had to be real careful there, because I got in trouble twice in that. But yeah, it came out that virtually all of them, every time they try to go to the church, it broke up into 3 different levels. If the voices were weak, the voices would scream bloody murder all the way to the church. But once they got inside, they shut up.
Wow.
If the voices were moderate in strength, they'd scream bloody murder all the way to the church, try to convince the guy he had other stuff that was more important to do. Stay out of there. This is a waste of time. Jesus couldn't even save himself. What makes you think he's going to save you? You're wasting your time in there. Then they'd go in, and then the voices would just start yelling and mocking the preacher, and this is bull crap. Why are you even here? You're wasting your time. So they wouldn't let the message, whatever the preacher was trying to say, they wouldn't let it through. And the ones who were really strong they would get up and bolt out of church. They'd just run out. They'd run out the door. So I found that odd. And then I had one patient tell me that when they repeated the 23rd Psalm, the voices would scream bloody murder. They told me that it was like throwing worms on a hot frying pan. That's how they reacted. And I'm like, well, that's odd for a hallucination. Why would a hallucination not want the person to go to church? Why would it care?
Yeah.
Why does it react to the 23rd? Why does a hallucination react to the 23rd Psalm like, it's a blowtorch?
Now that one is interesting, because 23rd Psalm is, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
They hate it. They hate it with a passion.
Wow.
So, and I started asking the others about it, and they said this. They said the same thing. when I got to the prison where I could, so there was, whatever this thing was, whatever these voices were, they didn't like anything positive and spiritual. So I already knew that by the time I got out of the state hospital. So 7 years of intense, working with these guys, and I was so tired of it because it was like I was beating my head against the wall. 7 years of asking them, okay, if the side effects aren't anywhere near as bad as the psychotic symptoms, why do you keep going off your meds and getting? I don't know.
Yeah. Wow.
It's like I felt like a lunatic myself, like doing the same thing over and over again. But they had to have the answer. They had to. Nobody else did. They had it. Had to be there somewhere. So all these little pieces they gave me when I was working at the state hospital about the voices. When I met a new patient that had voices, I'd say something like, okay, I know this much about them. I know they do this. I know they do that. And it was like, that like opened the door. It's like, hey, this guy's trying to understand. He understands some stuff, but he's not just telling us their hallucinations and go away and take your meds. So that, I don't know if I finished the thing with the psychiatric assaults on the psychiatrist, but I think that was tied into it. The voices telling them those medications were toxic.
This guy's hurting you.
Yeah, this guy's hurting you. And they were being attacked, even though they were only spending 15, 20 minutes a month with him.
Yeah.
And I was thinking for years, like, what in the dickens are they doing to piss these people off?
So bad in a 5-minute time span.
In a 15-minute session. So I sat in with them to try to see, and they weren't abusive for the most part. There were some that were, kind of gruff, and they got beat up more than the others. But for the most part, they were just dishing out meds, and that's what it was. The voices don't want them taking those meds because they calm the person down. And the other thing I noticed I noticed this in the prison. This was years later. This is, let me say, 7, 8, 9. It's a decade later, where I noticed that every time the voices attacked, the energy level of these people would diminish. It would just vanish, and they'd go from boom to boom where they couldn't even get out of bed sometimes.
Wow.
And I thought that was due to the intensity of the voices. Like if you can't sleep and you got these discarnate voices screaming in your ears, telling you to kill people and kill yourself and attack guards and don't take your meds and fight this guy and this guy's trying to kill you. And I mean, it's all this horrible stuff. I figured, if you were subjected with draining stuff all the time, and that would probably depress you. So one day I ended up in probably the hardest, most dangerous units in the prison system. But that was okay with me because I was an adrenaline junkie. I mean, that was like, yeah. And that was an important component. That was a real important component because I was going to places that I guess sane people wouldn't go. Kind of. And the other thing I had is, my dad was a rageaholic. I mean, he was just very unstable, and and the only way I could get back at him when I was a little kid is just by driving him to the verge of exploding and then backing off. And if I misjudged that, the consequences were severe.
Oh, I bet, yeah.
So I became pretty good at how hard, how fast can I push before an explosion.
Yeah.
And that's what I was using with these. There was no better training for what I went into in the situations
uniquely
I was
qualified for it in a way.
I was uniquely qualified, and for years I resented him, but it was like there was no better training. So I would push these guys to the very edge of how much information I could get out of them. And I had like a sixth sense about when they were going to explode, and I'd back off and take my little bag of goodies and then test it off against all these other schizophrenics. Well, did you experience this? You experience that? You experience this? And so it was always pushing them to the edge. And there was only one time I went over, and I knew I was going over. And I had a medical intern with me, and I was trying to give them a quick education as to what they were dealing with. And this guy picked up a big sofa chair and he threw it at me, and it just clipped the top of my head and bounced off the rock. And I'm like, okay, I know I knew I was past his limit. I knew it, but he was a drunken Apache that came down from northern Arizona. And Apaches, they're bad anyway, but you get a drunken Apache who's psychotic, and you start pushing him, man, and it was like playing with nitroglycerin. That's what that was like.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah, but I learned a lot from one other one. So where was I before I lapsed off into this? Oh, I was pushing. So here I was at I was assigned to the jail for the entire prison complex. Yeah, so here's the worst of the worst.
Yeah. Coming
into this building, and they were 2 people in the cell, maximum security. You know, they didn't go anywhere. They only were allowed out of their cell for 1 hour a day to go out into this chain link fence where they would get sunlight, and that was it. The rest of the time they were sealed up in this little room, probably smaller than your kitchen.
Wow.
And so I went into work one day, and here's a inmate letter from one of the prisoners in the central detention unit, the jail. And he's going, you know, I'm in cell, da, 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 da. I'm in with this guy he's crazy as a bed bug. I can't, he paces the floor all night. He's talking to himself. He's crazy. He's standing over me at 3 a.m, just staring at me. You know, talking to himself, having arguments, and we're pacing the cell, and you know, I can't talk to him, and he's just out of it. You know, you got to help me. And then that same morning, I get a call from the captain of that unit saying, you know, I've got this crazy guy locked in with this other guy, and things aren't mixing real well in there. You need to come over and take a look at what's going on here. So I pulled up the record for the guy who was sane in there and was complaining that, and what had happened to him is he snitched off the Aryan Brotherhood, which is a real dangerous gang in there, snitched off one of their drug deals, and they confiscated all their drugs. They took all the leaders into custody, and they broke up that entire gang and sent them all over the state.
Oh, wow.
To prisons all over the state. So that was a big no-no as far as prison etiquette goes for the prison.
Yeah, that's probably why they had him in the maximum security.
That's exactly why they had him. They had him in there for protective custody.
Yeah.
You know, and they wanted him, after they broke up the gang, the ones that were left, they wanted him so dead, so bad. They'd already stabbed him. Okay,
oh,
so
wow.
that's why he got in there in protective custody. They already got him once. They didn't kill him, but they did stab him. And then they wanted him dead so bad that they were actually getting in trouble on purpose, so they could get locked up in the CDU, so they would have a chance to get at this guy.
Oh, wow.
You know, so 1 or 2 of them got in there, and what they were doing is and I have no idea how I saw it. I've seen this with my own eyes. I have no idea how they do it. So you have the cell block that I would say probably 100 feet, 125 feet between the blocks, maybe more. And they get this little piece of paper and they put it on a string and they write notes on it. And then they throw it under the door, and it would shoot all the way across the floor under the door of the cell, all the way across the way. And whoever was there would take the note off, and then they'd pull the string back, and it would all happen in a matter of 2 or 3 seconds. Boom, boom. I saw it once. It was like, woo, and then
wow,
boom,
yeah.
it goes right back. And I'm like, whoa, that's how they do it, huh? That's what they were doing to him. They put you, we're here, we're going to get you. First chance we get, you know, we're going to, you know, we're right here. You know, we're going
to mess you up, basically.
Yep. And if they ever got out, they'd throw a note under the door. If they walked past his door, they'd bang on it. you couldn't be under more stress. They'd already stabbed him once. They're waiting
Yeah,
for him
they're
out there.
waiting. Yeah, this is just a long-term plan. They don't care
Yeah,
how long they're in
they
there.
don't
They're
they
gonna
don't
get
care.
that guy.
They wanted that guy dead, and then you're locked in on top of that with a Florida psychotic who knows what he did to get in there, and
Wow.
he's in the pitch black dark staring at you at 3 a.m. You wake up and you see this guy staring at you. So
Well,
you couldn't be under too much more stress than that.
so what was the resolution for that particular inmate? What did you end up doing? Because you said, you looked at his file, here was his circumstance. What became of that?
Well, I don't know exactly where it ended up because, being a psych, I don't have any control over the administration of the thing. As a matter of fact, in the prison, psychs are like, you're an inmate lover.
Yeah.
You're trying to help these guys. You're an inmate lover, you're psych.
Yeah.
It's like, but then they didn't know what to do when these guys went psycho on them.
Yeah.
They go, oh, get the psych, you got to handle this. You know what to do with this. So the things changed drastically at that point. But what I did is I told psychiatry, I said, this guy's floridly psychotic, the guy who's in there. He needs to be medicated. You need to bring him down because nobody's going to be able to house with this guy.
Yeah.
He's making life miserable for everybody. So I put that referral into psychiatry, and then it's up to them whether they medicate him or not.
So did you get the opportunity then, Jerry, to work with the psychotic?
Yeah, I pulled them both up. So I went in there that day, and the first thing I did is I pulled up the guy who the gangsters were after.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting up in the interview room on the second tier of the cell block, and I'm watching him come up the steps. And he just bounds up the steps. I mean, boom, boom, he comes up. His gait was good. He walked, there was no shuffle gait. He looked like he had plenty of energy. He sat down. He told me his story. He wasn't slumped over. His cognitive status was good. He was fearful. He was anxious. He was depressed. But there was no massive lack of energy like with the psychotics. I mean, he told me his story and I understood it. I told him, okay, I'll talk to the captain. I'll see what we can do for you. I can't guarantee anything because I really don't have any power when it comes to administration. I can put in my recommendations. So after I was done with him, I called up the floridly psychotic guy, and I watched him come out, and he just drug out of the cell. He just pulling himself up the stairs, no energy, shuffled, real slow gait, step after step, shuffled down the hall, sat down, slumped in the chair, and he was like, no energy. He had to struggle for words and was just out of it. He told me, yeah, I'm hearing a bunch of voices. I can't sleep, that kind of stuff. But his energy level was in the dumps.
Yeah.
And to compare them, I mean, there was no better experimental situation. They're both in the same cell. They're both eating the same food. They got the same guards. They're in the same situation. Everything was equalized. You couldn't put a better experiment together if you tried.
Right.
Everything is equated for. All the variables are the same. All the way down the line. And I walked out of there and I go, it's not the anxiety. It's not the anxiety. You couldn't be under more anxious situation than this guy, who had snitched off the gangsters.
Yeah, exactly.
Short of war. So I'm like, well, if it's not the anxiety, then what is it? What is causing this? And then I had to reformulate everything. So it's like what I was operating on was wrong. And I checked that out with, other schizophrenics, and it's like, okay, so if it's not that, what is it?
Well, this might be a perfect opportunity for us to take a break. I've gone way over the usual amount of time that we usually do before going to a break. So let's go ahead and go to a break. When we come back, let's unpack that a little bit. And
we went an hour already, huh?
Yeah, we did. And we will kind of unpack that and go into a little bit more about the traumas, and then even, let's start talking about entities a little bit too. And we'll just kind of take it from there.
Okay, so I'll go into where I discovered these things were entities, because that was in the prison where I did that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everybody, stay tuned. If you're like me, you're probably on the edge to find out where all of this is going. So we'll be back in just a moment.
Are you looking for the highest quality herbal supplements and remedies for your home apothecary? Or maybe you're looking to take your spellcraft, magical workings, or offerings to the next level. Whatever your reasons might be, we have hundreds of herbal spagyric items available, and every purchase supports our work and helps bring spagyria into the light of the modern world. Here at the Phoenix Aurelius Research Academy, we produce dozens and dozens of items of spagyric pharmacopoeia each year, even though we only need a few samples for our research purposes. So the remaining quantities are available to the public in our online spagyric apothecary. Only the highest quality natural, organic, biodynamic, and ethically wildcrafted materials go into our products, and every purchase you make helps fund our research. As an Alchemiculture podcast listener, you can get your hands on our professionally crafted small batch spagyric products for 15% off using coupon code LISTEN15. So go ahead and browse our enormous selection of products and get yourself something new, or pick up one of your favorite products today. Visit phoenixaurelius.org/apothecary and enter coupon code LISTEN15 to take 15% off your entire order. And thanks in advance for supporting our research.
All right, guys, we're back. And actually, Jerry and I were talking on the break. I really should have just been recording that entire segment of things that we were talking about. But before the break, we were talking about some of Jerry's experiences. And really what we wanted to do now is kind of talk about the spiritual and traumatic and emotional elements that have led to a lot of the psychosis, particularly of the schizophrenic population that you were working with. And, how did you come to the conclusion that these were entities that you were working with? Maybe you could address that for us, Jerry.
Well, there's two aspects to that. Is one, I was a student of Emanuel Swedenborg, a Christian mystic who lived some 700 years ago. And he was one of the top scientists of his day. He was the chief mining engineer for the Queen of Sweden. He invented all this kind of stuff. He was a doctor, a mining engineer. I mean, he was one of the few people that probably knew everything there was at that time. And at the age of 50, Spirit said, okay, drop all that stuff. And now you're going to investigate the spiritual world. So he was given the freedom to travel to heaven and hell. And he would come back and he would write about these, what he saw there and the spirits he spoke to. And I started reading his stuff, and it related to what I was actually seeing around me. But what was particularly interesting is his conversations that he had with evil spirits matched exactly what the voices were telling these psychotic prisoners.
Right.
And then I ran into Wilson Van Dusen, who wrote The Presence of Other Worlds. He was a clinical psychologist at a private psych hospital in Northern California. And I read his book. And then when some of this traumatic stuff happened, I contacted him. I didn't even know if he was still alive, but there was a Swedenborgian church here in Tucson. And I went to the preacher, and he mentioned that he knew Van Dusen. And I said, if he's still alive, I need to find him, because he's the only one that'll understand. I didn't have anybody I could talk to about this stuff. Because the voices are doing this and they're telling them this kind of stuff, and I'm seeing all this. I couldn't talk to my boss. I couldn't talk to any of these other guys. I couldn't talk to anybody. Nobody would understand except the psychotics themselves. They're the only guys I could talk to who understood.
Yeah.
And there was a period of time. We have a closing that. There's a period of time where I thought I was going nuts. Because here's all this weird stuff happening. But after I realized it wasn't a part of the subconscious mind, that it wasn't the anxiety, I sensed that it was the voices that were driving their behavior, because they would tell me at times, the voices told me to do this, the voices tell me to do that. So when I got to the prison, I made a deal with certain prisoners, the ones who were willing to tell me in real time what their voices were telling them while we were in session. And those were the ones I worked with most intensely.
Yeah.
And those were the ones I found most fascinating. And the voices would always come through, and don't listen to him, and don't go to his appointments. He's crazy. He's stupid. Get out of there. So here was this battle, between these voices who didn't want these patients telling me anything. And so I always had, the entire time I was in the prison, I always had a retinue of maybe 10 or 12 prisoners who we had an agreement. I'd do everything I could to help them out that I knew. And that if they ran into any trouble while I was doing my investigations, I'd get them in as soon as possible. The deal we had is they get some pebbles and throw them against my office window, because they couldn't get past the guard in the medical department. And then I'd look out, see who they were, and get them in as soon as I could. So it was kind of like, okay, if anything I'm talking about, anything I'm bringing out, working with you is causing you some trouble, I'll do whatever I can to remediate it.
Yeah.
So they would tell me what the voices were saying in real time, and we had an agreement. Tell me what they're telling while you're here. I'm going to give you some stuff to try while you're, before you come back next week, and you tell me how it worked. And I knew the voices were behind this. I sensed it, but I wasn't quite sure what to do about it. So Wilson Van Dusen, the other Swedenborg guy, we compared notes, and he saw the same thing with his psychotic patients that I did. He wrote about it in his book. So we're both agreeing on this, and we decided we need to let this out to the world. And he already published one book. I had no idea what to do, how to make a book. So we started writing, and we got to the 3rd chapter before a fast-moving cancer just took him over and killed him.
Oh, wow.
So we never did get that done, but we did agree that, the evil spirits that Swedenborg talked about were saying the same exact things to his psychotics as they were saying to my psychotics.
Mm-hmm.
So what he did is he sent me a book called 30 Years Among the Dead, and I forgot who wrote it, but it was written by a dentist of all people. It seems like the dentists, for some reason, are in on, it's more than one dentist that's investigating this stuff, and I don't know why it's dentists. But what he would do is he would work with his wife, who was a medium, and he knew that these things were spirits. So he had a static shock machine. And what he would do is he'd administer these static shocks to his patients, and the voices hated that. And they would leave the body temporarily, and then his wife would pick up on them, talk them into the light. And if she could get them into the light, they would disappear. And I found that fascinating.
Yeah.
So Van Dusen's been sending me all these advertisements for static shock machines. And I'm like, Wilson, what are you doing? I can't bring a shock machine into the freaking prison and start shocking prisoners. What are you thinking?
Yeah.
I'm in enough trouble right now just for asking questions. What do you think they're going to do if I start shocking prisoners with this device you sent me that I can buy for $150 or $200 from Amazon? I can't do that, But it intrigued me, because what was said was that shock hurt the prisoners, or not the prisoners, but the spirits, the voices, more than it hurt the person.
Yeah.
So I know now that there's something called the Tesla violet ray that administers plasma, electric plasma. It'd be great to be able to experiment to see what effect that has on the voices. But I no longer have direct access to a clinical population now.
Yeah.
But I went, it was an intriguing concept. I mean, if you could drive those things out or shut them up just for a short period of time, because what they do is they get this narrative running.
Yeah.
And the patient can't break it. It's like that. It's like a car that's going at 100 miles an hour, and you can't slow it down fast enough to hit the brake. It's like, so for months, I'm like, okay, what can I do that would serve that same purpose without getting me fired? So I already knew from the state hospital that the voices hated the 23rd Psalm. So I started handing that out to the prisoners, my little group there, to find out, what the response was. Well, it did have that same negative effect with the prisoners as it had with the psych patients, 2,500 miles away. And what was interesting is the voices were telling the prisoners the same kinds of things, running the same patterns as they did 2,500 miles away at the mental hospital. So it's almost like they were all made from the same cookie cutter. They were running the same program, and they were running the same patterns.
Yeah.
So if they're running patterns, they can't be random hallucinations. So I knew that because I could clearly see the patterns that they were running. So the deal became how to break up those patterns. And I suspected the answer was with Wilson's shock, where you could break that pattern suddenly and then slip some information in where they weren't under control and in control of the patient's mind. But how to do that was another story. So it must have been 5 months. I'm like, all thinking, how can I do this without getting fired? How can I do this?
Yeah.
And I'm like thinking, and every idea I came up with would get me fired.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, this doesn't apply.
So one day I'm talking to a secretary, and we're carrying on a conversation. I look down on her desk, and here's this rubber band, this red rubber band sitting there staring me in the face. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, why are you looking at a rubber band? And then boom, it's like, rubber band. So you could put it on the wrist and snap it, and it would serve that same shock purpose. You put it on their wrist, you pull it back and snap it, and that snap would serve the same purpose as a shock. So what I did is I went and I got some rubber bands and started experimenting with that. Gave these prisoners, schizophrenic prisoners hearing voices, gave them the rubber band for a week and told them to snap it every time that the voices came and come back and tell me what happened. And it worked, just like the static shock worked. So it would shut them up if they remember to use it, number one. And number two, it would only work for a short period of time, like from 10 seconds to maybe a couple of minutes. That's it.
Wow.
But the prisoners were consistently reporting that it hurt the voices much more than it hurt them. And I found that interesting. So I went, okay, what if we combine that snap with the reading of the 23rd Psalm? Because I was handing them out the 23rd Psalm, telling them to read it when the voices came, but the voices would get them to forget to read it. Yeah. They would lose it. They wouldn't read it. The voices just negated it. They would not allow them to remember to use it. There's something more important, or they carry it around their pocket and they'd forget to use it all day. But they were aware of when the voices reached a certain threshold. So past a certain point, they didn't really bother them. But if they crossed that threshold, they became very noticeable and started driving their thoughts and their behavior. So they were able to realize when they got to that point. So I'd start passing out the rubber bands, and I said, okay, when you get to that point, snap the rubber band and read the 23rd Psalm. And it worked. It was like a 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
It didn't last for very long, but it had a noticeable effect on the voices, and they didn't like it. So for the first time in the experience of these psychotic prisoners, they were able to exert some kind of control over the voices. Bam, bam. Yeah. And even though they came back, they do it again. It was bam, bam. So they'd come back and they had snapped the rubber bands, and their wrists were red.
Yeah.
So I'd have, or they'd lose the rubber band.
Yeah.
So they were destroying the rubber bands, but they did work in the 23rd. So it gave them a very little amount of control. Yeah. But it was the first control they ever had, other than the voices, and they could administer it when they needed to. So it was the first time they realized that there was other things that can be brought to bear that would give them some modicum of
yeah.
control. Even though it was for a short while, but they could repeat it. So somehow the chief psychologist found out that I was handing out rubber bands, and here I was again. I got called up in front of them. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, what are you doing? I went, but it works. But it works. What are you? You can't be doing that. Well, it's a rubber band. Stop it right now, and don't be handing out the 23rd time you're not a preacher.
It's like, okay, this is just too much
So-
legislation and bureaucracy around this.
Oh God! So I went and I ordered one of those. What do they call it? Preacher certificate off of Amazon that you
Yeah.
could get for $10, and I'm a preacher now.
Yeah.
You go, get out of my office. I was always in trouble. I was always in trouble. So that worked. It actually worked. It didn't work for any length of time, but it did work. So the key was to break up the patterns that these things were running. So here they are in their heads telling them all this rotten stuff about themselves and everybody else, and causing them to misinterpret what was happening in the environment around them in the worst possible manner. I mean, it was the voices that were creating this alternate, ugly reality and shutting down their thought system. Now, the problem is that we're all taught from the time we're born that every thought that comes into your mind is yours. It belongs to you. You're responsible for it. It doesn't come from anywhere else. Now, Swedenborg is saying that ain't the truth.
Yeah.
All thoughts come from somewhere else. You're just the chooser.
Yeah, exactly. You're the antenna.
It's like your mind is the radio set.
Yep.
With the antenna, and you're the one that turns the frequency. But in this case, it's the voices that are turning the knob for the frequency in a negative direction, and the person has lost control. So the problem became how to interfere with the voices and the patterns that are running to give the guy a chance to kind of insert something else.
Yeah.
But the problem is a number of these prisoners, even without my, they were like wondering what are the voices, and they would ask them. Scores of them would ask them, "Who are you? What are you?" And the voices would tell them, "We are you." So that idea that all thoughts belong to you, is something that Swedenborg just threw out the window.
Yeah.
And so did Van Dusen. And I knew that this wasn't the patient. I mean, these voices weren't who this guy actually was, but getting them to realize it was another story, because the voices would tell them, "We are you."
Yeah.
So it's like everything that's going through your head is who you are.
Well, and that seems like that's a very good gaslighting narrative.
Yes.
Entity.
Yeah, it worked very well.
Exactly. Well, Jerry, I find this really, really fascinating, because within the type of pharmacopoeia that I practice within spagyric medicine, Paracelsus basically said, like I mentioned before we even started this, that there are 5 causes of disease, and one of those is called inspirituale. And he found very frequently that there were spiritual causes where there were entities that would prey upon various emotional states, and therefore end up causing diseases by creating various belief systems and other things. And also Paracelsus came up with the term astral to talk about the astral plane and the astral effect, where he said that all thoughts and emotions basically originate and exist in that plane that is a pre-physical plane, and then physical things, based on their shape and their proportions, they are thus antennas basically to be able to receive and to transmit various signals from that plane into that plane again.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, and Paracelsus was also a very deep Christian mystic as well. He has many different tracks on this. So we're coming from maybe 2 different sources, but almost the exact same perspective. And what I have found in the populations that I have worked with that have any sort of we could call them psychiatric afflictions, perhaps. It doesn't matter what range it is. Every single one of those is affected on that spiritual level every time that we perform the type of analysis that we perform, which is partially kinesiological. It's called intrinsic data field analysis, but we'll find out that they're affected by this ens spirituale. There might be other things as well that they are affected by, but that is by and large the main thing that needs to be affected. In fact, you might be interested to hear this. There has yet to be, I live in Utah, you live in Arizona. We have a lot of LDS population in our states, same with Idaho, very overwhelming. In the LDS church, they perform these things, young kids perform these things called the baptisms of the dead. And this is why genealogy is actually so important to the Mormons. They have the kids perform all this genealogy, and then I think it's when they're 13, they go in and there's a list of about 50 of these deceased people whose names that they have from various relatives of other people who are members of the church. And the kids get into the baptismal font and they get dunked to baptize. So they'll read out the name and they'll say, John Doe, I baptize you, in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and do this whole thing and baptize the kids vicariously in the name of that dead person. Ooh, right? Ooh. Well, what we have found is that the number of entities, now these particular type we have identified as being lunar entities. They have some sort of connection with the moon. We're not exactly sure how, but they are entangled with the Mormon church in a way that I have not seen any other church have an affiliation with dark entities just on level of, sacrament.
Well, a lot of the infestations are dead relatives.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they don't mean any. And I've run into that too while I was working with these guys. It was a dead relative, or it was, in one case I remember, it was a motorcycle rider who got killed on the motorcycle, and he was wandering around, didn't know what to do, and he saw another guy riding a motorcycle, and he got into him, and that was the prisoner.
Wow.
So there's all kinds of levels of different entities, not just the malicious ones, but all of them are deleterious to the health of the person.
Yeah, there should be one entity, your soul, inside of your body with your spirit. So that's something that I find really fascinating. That is a major parallel between our work. Two entirely different frames of reference between experience and two very, very similar conclusions. So
the truth is the truth. We're just coming at it from different directions.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and what's interesting is, I think that it's so fascinating that the modern establishment theorizes that these are chemical imbalances. Particularly, they're saying that they're neurotransmitter and or hormone imbalances, which are really the neurological system, the endocrinological system are the only two major interfaces between electricity and chemistry that the body has. They're called electrochemical interfaces of the body. And it's interesting that these subtle impulses like electricity and electromagnetics are able to impact these spirits, which, oftentimes when we're doing paranormal investigation, we are looking for electromagnetic spikes, in the ambiental environment. And then we're also using, different tools like the SB7s and SB11s. Spirit boxes.
Oh, spirit boxes. You know what? There's a lot of people getting infested by those things, the spirit boxes. I've got a number of people that wrote back to me and said, yeah, I was hearing the spirit through the box and now it's in my head and they can't get rid of it. And this, one of the people that we have a hearing voices group, so these people could at least talk to each other.
Yeah. And
there's a number of them saying, yeah, I started off with the spirit boxes and now that spirit is in my head and I can't get rid of it. Now they're filling me full of drugs. So you got to be careful with that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh man, if I had a dime for every time I told people, here are the protections that you need to place on yourself before you just go do these things. Don't errantly walk in thinking that ghosts are cool and you're just going to listen to them and that's the end. They latch on to anybody. They're incorporeal, wanting to be corporeal, and you are a body. You are corporeal, buddy. So,
It's the same thing with drug addicts and alcoholics.
Yep.
That they're waiting. They put the ideas in their head. Said, yeah, you need to drink because they're out here, and they hang around bars and stuff. But the guy's got to get to a certain state of intoxication before they can jump in there.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
I remember one guy. This was another Apache Indian. So I was good friends with the head of the Indian group in the prison. So I would help them get wood and their sweat lodge and that kind of stuff. And here they brought this one Apache down who was kind of like he was like an evil shaman. I mean,
Yeah, like a sorcerer almost.
yeah, like kind of like a sorcerer. And he was so violent that the Navajos, no, it was Apache, they couldn't deal with him. So they brought him down to the prison, and I'm watching him. He doesn't even go to the classification center. I'm watching him on the computer, and he's just blowing through all these normal checks where they'd stop and they evaluate him, they take him for a while. He's just blowing through all these things, and he arrives on the unit. And I'm like, an Apache medicine man or an evil medicine man or whatever, but he was a chronic bad alcoholic and very violent. So when he got there, I pulled him into my office. I said, hey, I'm your psych. I'm going to be watching over you, and I'll call you in once a month. And you could just feel the hatred coming out of him. I mean, he's this big guy, and he, just that hatred just coming out of him. I could just feel it. And I said, okay, just wanted to introduce myself. I'll be calling you in a month. So I did that every month and got that same kind of reaction. And I went to the head of the Indian group, who was a Navajo. And I said, what's with this guy? And he goes, you be careful of him. You be careful of him. And I'm like,
Wow.
okay. So it took about 6 months before I could start getting this guy to interact with me. When I felt like he was getting fed up, that sixth sense I had, I go, okay, he's had enough, and let him out.
Yeah.
So I push him as far as I could and get what I could out of him. And then he started telling me these stories about spirits chasing him and casting spells on people and making them sick and running from spirits and this whole world that was very strange. And I was fascinated. And finally, I asked him, I said, well, if you know this stuff, why can't you stay out of trouble? Why are you in prison? And he went, it's because of the spirits of dead alcoholics, and he told me about this bar in Phoenix. He said if he went anywhere near that bar, that the dead spirits of alcoholics were piled all the way up out of sight at that bar. And if he went anywhere near there, they would jump him and start, you need to drink, you need a drink, you need a drink. I mean, you've got to drink now. I mean, and they're the ones that want to get drunk.
Yeah.
So they AA, I think, has building up to a drink stuff. So it's all these mental changes that these things suggest to the alcoholic. Yeah, well, you can have one, or you can go meet your friend in the bar, or you can walk past the bar. It's like step by step that they break in there. And I've spoken to several others who are saying, it's not just the alcoholic who's drinking. It's all these spirits that need to get drunk, and they can't get drunk without a body.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And again, kind of going back to, you have to alter the neurology of the individual in order for these spirits to be able to be appeased, because at that point, now they can become largely manipulative. They have more power over that individual. So I find that really fascinating. All of the things that alter neurotransmitters, like alcohol temporarily increases your GABA, makes you feel good, and all these things, decreases dopamine response though, and other things. So you end up seeing that there are electrochemical fluctuations that are happening within the individual that might cause more of a susceptibility. We see this even within non-psychotic populations. People who will go to the bar and drink really heavily oftentimes do get temporary possessions or spiritual influences that end up happening. They behave in very uncharacteristic ways to the ways that they normally would.
Yeah, and these voices use these drugs for their own purposes, and methamphetamine is one of the most dangerous and the worst. I've seen more prisoners come in psychotic after using methamphetamine. So they were seeing something called the shadow people. So I started talking to them about the shadow people and what they were. But what they were all telling me, or a lot of them told me, is that when they ran out of meth, the voices would tell them where to be and when to be there, and somebody would just come out of nowhere with the meth.
Yeah. Well, we see that hugely on the street populations out here where I'm at in Ogden. There have always been since meth has really been created, meth problems here in Utah. We have a huge Air Force base where a wide number of the chemicals can be easily smuggled out, and this is primarily where the chemicals are coming from in order to make it, and it's well known among street population it's coming from Hill Air Force Base. But they'll be able to make it in these really dingy labs out here, and then it's very widely available, and we have enormous amounts of psychotic homeless populations here that are constantly having conversations with themselves, arguing with people who aren't physically there. You know, and you see this all over, but it's really concentrated in the area around the Union Station here in Ogden, Utah. So I've grown up with this my entire life, seeing this and wondering about this phenomena. I worked with a shaman. He's now deceased, bless his heart. His name is Nick Stark, and he was the apprentice of shaman, what's his name? I can't remember. Juan de Dios Garcia is his actual name, but Shaman Cucho is his name. And he's the guardian of Machu Picchu down in Peru.
Oh, I've been there. It's an incredible place.
It is incredible. So Nick Stark was a shaman who was apprenticing under him, and he would bring Cucho up here to Ogden many, many times, and he would go down to the jungle and lead ceremonies out there. And he had a specialty because Nick himself had a severe cocaine addiction in the 70s and early 80s. His brother was importing it and running clubs and owned a lot of clubs, and so it was very prevalent during the late 70s and 80s for cocaine to be present in these club environments. And so he started doing that. He was a very successful architect, and he went down to the jungle because he, quote unquote, wanted to stop being a prick. He wanted to stop being a jerk, and he didn't know what the next step was, but he thought he'd work with these shamans, and ultimately ended up doing it for the rest of his life. So later in life, he started working with people who had drug addiction, and every single time he would always have to work these spirits out of the body of various individuals. And you could just see the major characteristic changes in the mentality of people before they worked with Nick, as opposed to after they worked with Nick, and how their entire frame of thought and thinking, I mean, just even 15 minutes after his work was done, you could see huge changes, but then that would last for years and years and years. So for me, it was really fascinating to be able to see and put all of this together in a way that shows and corroborates exactly what your experience is here, is that drugs like methamphetamine, heroin, you know, even cannabis, alcohol, more, you know, quote unquote, benign substances can ultimately end up leading people to having, what shall we say, maybe psychotic moments or episodes, even if they're not permanently possessed. They can really cause some crazy damage.
Well, yeah, but I've never seen any that was as dangerous or in bringing on a permanent psychosis as methamphetamine.
You're right. Same here.
You know, there is no more dangerous drug out there than that stuff.
Yeah.
And you know that where these spirits are telling them where to go and when to be there. You know, they would tell them which houses to rob.
Yeah. Manipulating tons of behavior of the human organism.
Oh yeah, and see, here's psychiatry writing all this off. You know, oh, take this drug and shut up. You know, they're not curing anything. You know, we're spiritual beings. This is just a vessel. You know, it's a spirit gets sick before the body turns physically sick.
Yes.
You know, and there's one story that I couldn't even believe when I was talking to this guy, and this prisoner fully recovered. And he was telling me this story when he was recovered. He'd been off all meds for a good while. We got rid of the voices. And he said he was in San Diego one day, and the voices told him to, he had like $250. They said, take your $250, get 2 burlap bags, fill your car up with gas, and we know where there's a Sesamelia pot field up in Oregon. You know, we'll show you where it is. So he trusted the voices well enough to do that. So he filled up his car, got 2 burlap bags, and here the voices are telling him turn by turn where to go to get there. So he gets up to Oregon from San Diego and turns off in the country near the mountains, and then they tell him to turn onto this dirt road. So he drives like 23 miles of dirt road into the middle of nowhere, And the dirt road dead ends at the base of a mountain. And he goes, okay, now what? And they say, well, get out. There's a path over to your left. Take your burlap bags and walk. It's a few miles up there. Just start walking up the path. So he takes the burlap bag and he takes his machete thing. And he walks up the path for a few hours and comes to this giant sesamoidal pot field. And he cuts it down and he fills up his 2 burlap bags and he goes, okay, now what? And the voices go, well, we know a park where you can sell it. So he brings it back down and goes to this park and he's selling this sesamoidal. So he's making a lot of money and he bought all the alcohol he could drink, all the cocaine he could get his hands on, all the alcohol he could drink, and all the prostitutes he could pay for. Yeah. So he's like the life of Riley for somebody who's a drug addict and in that bent. But what surprised me, he said they wanted to go fishing. I said, come on, you're shitting me, man. Get out of here.
Yeah, you're like that.
I'm like, even that was hard for me to even take. I'm like, come on, man. You're telling me the truth, right? No, oh no, honest. They wanted to go fishing. They were fishermen. And I mean, what? He goes, yeah. We went out to the Columbia River one morning and he said, I was the only one catching anything out there. They'd tell me where to throw the hook, how long to be there, when to move on. So here he was fishing with his voices, and this went on for about a month. He'd run out of marijuana, he'd go back up there, get some more. About the 3rd time, he said, well, I'm out of marijuana, I'm almost out of money. I need to go back up there. And voices said, no, don't do it. They're waiting for you. Go up there this time, they'll kill you. They know you've been robbing their crop. They're waiting for you.
Wow.
So they said, get your money and go back down to San Diego where you came from. Flings over. I was like, and I'm like taking this in like, okay.
Yeah. That's
so what they're after is that withdrawal.
Yeah.
They don't like marijuana because there's no withdrawal. So I've had a bunch of patients tell me that the voices didn't like them using marijuana because it calms them down and there's no nasty withdrawal.
Yeah.
What I've found is patients who are right on the border, they're very unstable. Marijuana may throw them over.
Yeah.
And throw them into a temporary psychotic state, but it usually doesn't last long, like it does with cocaine and especially meth.
Yeah, crack cocaine.
So the voices are telling them, no, don't use marijuana, don't use the meds that the psychiatrists are giving you. You may as well, if you're going to get high and shut us up for a while, you may as well at least drink alcohol or get cocaine or go get some meth. We'll shut up if you use that.
Yeah, exactly.
And they do. They shut up while they're high.
Yeah. They're appeased. They got what they want.
Yeah, they're appeased. They got what they want.
Behavior.
Yeah.
So what's really fascinating, within my family and extended family and so on and so forth, I've seen a wide variety of different psychotic elements and psychiatric illnesses and diseases. In fact, my ex's uncle, he and all of his siblings, so he has 2 sisters, which is my ex's mom and her aunt, they were all raped by their father from the time they were about 3 until the time they were 15.
That'll do it.
And I think that sexual abuse is actually one of those portals where this happens more frequently than with just about anything else.
I agree.
Any other type of trauma, but he was schizophrenic until the day he died, which sadly he died. He was only 55 years old. And nobody would believe him that he had been sexually abused by his father. And even his mother ended up covering it all up. And, she divorced him.
That's devastating.
It's devastating. So it literally forces the person into the state of psychosis. But I think that these traumas open up portals. Maybe I'm using incorrect terminology, but this is just the way that I'm perceiving and picking up on it. Opens up portals to where the feelings and emotions that are so repressed can be expressed by being fed on by these various entities. They use them as a type
they bring them up because they need to generate that negative emotional energy. That's what they feed off.
Yeah.
So remember I was talking to you about the prisoners that when the voices came, they were drained.
Yes.
Well, that's what they're doing. So they bring up those memories and they rub them in their face, and they accuse the victim, saying, you brought it on, it was your fault, because that's what you did this, it's your fault, you're responsible for this, remember this, you're a rotten, dirty person now. And so they'll go in, they have complete access to the schizophrenic's memory. They can pull up stuff that they'd forgotten decades ago. I had one guy pull up something where he didn't pay a 10-cent debt or something like that, like 30 years ago, and they pulled that up, and you robbed your father, it's money, it's like they can pull up all that stuff, and they rub it in their faces until they generate this negative emotional energy, and then they drain it off.
Yep, exactly.
And that's where that energy drains. So they're parasitic entities, and that's the last thing that they want the patient to know. If every time I went to tell a patient that I thought could understand and benefit from it, that the voices weren't them, and that they were parasites, and that energy drain was due to the voices would go nuts.
Yeah.
They would go absolutely nuts. But what was interesting is they went nuts in a pattern. And I could use that pattern against them. So when soon as they realized that I was heading in that direction, they'd get louder. So before they kicked up, I mean, it was like pushing a button. It was like, but boom, if you push that button, they'd go off. If you went to tell the patient that their voices were parasites and the voices realized that, they'd go off. I mean, it was 1-to-1 every time.
Wow.
And they said the same thing every time. So what I do is try to get as much information over to the patient as I could before I started approaching that area where they had to know that these things are parasites, because they have to know that. If you had a leech on you, you wouldn't leave it there, you'd do something about it. If you realized you're being drained by these things, you're going to do something about it. You don't know what it is, but you realize now they're an enemy. They're not who you are, they're an enemy. So what I'd do is I'd ask the patient, especially in the ER, because they didn't give us much time to work with people in the ER. Now, that's where I spent the last 10 years of my life, working psych crisis in the ERs in these big hospitals. So, the ones I thought were able to handle it, I'd ask them, well, do you hear the voices right now? And they said, well, no. I said, when did you hear them last? And they said, a few hours ago. I said, well, you're going to hear them in about 4 minutes.
Yeah.
They're going to get very loud, and this is what they're going to tell you. They're going to tell you, I'm stupid, I'm crazy, I'm psychotic, I'm a nutcase, don't listen to anything I have to say. So what I tried to do before that point was give them enough information about the voices to let them know that I understood what they were and how they worked and what they were going through. And that had never happened before.
Yeah.
No psychiatrist could ever relate to them on that level, and neither could a psychologist. So when they found somebody who understood anything of what they were going through, they were all ears. So they weren't going anywhere. They're going to, hey, man, this guy knows something that I don't. I'm going to stay here and listen. So I said, okay, if you still stay here, then they're going to tell you to get up and leave my office and try to escape the ER, or run, or I would tell them that, try to get out of the ER, because you're locked in, and you try to get out that door, they're going to call security, and you're going to be strapped down. They're going to fill you full of drugs.
Exactly.
Don't do that. So, and then I'd tell them, if you don't do that and you stay here, they're going to tell you to attack me. And I'd say it's going to happen in that order. And that's the order it usually happened in. And some of them would say, hey, they already done that. Other ones would, as I went to tell them, it would roll off. And then after they like, how did you know that? Are you crazy too? I go,
no, I spent a lot of time in this world, though.
I spent a lot of time, right? So sometimes I wonder, but I'd say, anybody else been able to tell you that or predict that? And they were like mesmerized. It's like, how did you know that? How did you know that?
I've seen the pattern. It's the same pattern.
Yeah. And it happens over and over and over. They run these patterns, and there's 23 patterns that we had, no more than that now, 27 that we identified. And if they're running these, and these are fixed, repeatable, non-changeable patterns, it happens with all of them. If they're running that many patterns, they're not hallucinations like psychiatry is saying. So what in the blazes is psychiatry treating?
Yeah.
They don't know what they're treating. They're just putting Band-Aids or drugging these guys and causing chemical lobotomies on them, shutting them up, and they take these drugs and get out of my face.
I think that this conversation is absolutely important. Let's go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, though, Jerry, what I want to talk with you about is how this can be happening on individual and sociological levels right now, just even with the media. These voices don't necessarily always have to come from disembodied entities that you can't see and happen within schizophrenic populations. Like we were talking about before we started the show, this can also happen within completely quote
Well,
unquote
I'll
sane.
tell you what we'll do. We'll pull. I have that list of patterns that these voices run.
Oh,
Okay,
perfect.
and anybody who doesn't believe it that works with schizophrenics can check this out for themselves. Don't believe me. Don't believe me. You listen to these patterns and you see if your schizophrenics are not running these patterns.
Well,
if the voices aren't telling them these things. And then what we'll do is take that and compare it to the mainstream media and
yeah,
the messages that they're giving to all of us right now.
yeah.
It's exactly the same. They're exactly the same.
See, this is so crazy. And I think that actually the most convincing voices are the ones that sound like your own voice as well, so that you can't differentiate between
And
what is
that's it.
your
There was one time I prayed while I was working at the state hospital. It was like, Lord, let me experience these things once just to see what they're like, and I got a whole story around that too. They tried to kill me right off the bat. Tried to drown me, but it didn't work because I'm a certified scuba diver. I love the water. I'm like a fish in the water. I was out in the middle of this lake at like 11 o'clock at night swimming, and I was too tired to get back to shore. I wasn't worried about it. I knew what to do. And here's this voice telling me, "You're going to drown. You're going to drown. You're going to drown," and coming up with all this evidence of why I should drown. I was too tired to get to shore. One thing after another. I ended up at the bottom of the lake at midnight. Like 30 feet down. Just defying every step of what it said.
Yep.
So that's an interesting story too.
I've got some stories along similar lines. Actually, I think people just really need to know how prevalent these entities are. But let's come back.
They hit everybody.
They do. So yeah, let's take a break and let's come back and explore that, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be right back.
Perhaps you've heard Phoenix speak about alchemy and spagyria, and you yourself want to start practicing? Phoenix has been engaged in more than 15 years of consistent split tests in order to find the most practical and standardized methods to create the highest quality items of spagyric pharmacopoeia possible. He provides the most detailed multimedia courses in existence, walking you through every aspect of spagyria, including beginning theory, setting up your lab, proper technique, important details on how to make a spagyric like a pro, tips for advanced practice, alchemical and hermetic applications, astrological theory, and so much more. In any of his online courses, you will be thoroughly guided through making your own items of spagyric pharmacopoeia, including spagyric tinctures, spagyric elixirs, spagyric essences, spagyric stones, and so much more. You will be able to set up your own laboratory in your home or business and craft up your very own alchemical apothecary in no time flat. To learn more about our online courses, simply visit www.phoenixaurelius.org/online courses and begin your spagyric journey today. And as an Alchemiculture podcast listener, you get to save 15% off the tuition of any course by entering the coupon code TEACHME15 at checkout. Again, that is coupon code TEACHME15, which will save you a whole 15% off any of Phoenix's online courses. As always, all proceeds go towards supporting this podcast and furthering our research.
Thanks for joining us. We're here with Jerry Marzinsky. If you are just tuning in, or maybe you have listened to this whole thing and still like, wow, what can I draw away? I just want to condense some of the bullet points. First thing is that Jerry's experience shows that certain populations of schizophrenic individual actually are inhabited by entities that are influencing their behavior, and the types of voices that they're listening to are typically disembodied entities that have some sort of influence or permanent habitation inside of that individual. And I think a lot of people, as we were discussing right before the break, actually do have these types of voices because the entry point seems to be at traumatic places um, in a person's history. Especially, it seems really concentrated with sexual trauma, but really any emotional trauma can be used as an entry point for virtually any entity that sympathizes or feeds on the type of emotion that uh, type of trauma has kind of instigated within an individual, and that drugs, primarily methamphetamine, crack cocaine, those seem to be the worst, but also alcohol and just about any other substance as well, can exacerbate or push somebody over the edge to the point where they become full-on diagnosed psychotic. But a lot of us have instances or even entire lifetimes where there are entities impacting us and talking to us and influencing our behavior. And like we said right before the break, the best ones are mimetic to your own voice, meaning that you can't actually differentiate most of the time between your own thoughts and the thoughts that are being influenced by these other entities, narratives that are being told about you, that you can't do something, that you're not good enough, that, this and that, to create sensations of depression, of anxiety, of whatever, because it's those emotions that are the food, the feeding ground material for many of these entities. So this is a lot of kind of the extrapolations of what we've got into. And now that we're back, Jerry and I wanted to go into his extrapolations of the various patterns that he has seen within schizophrenic populations, so that we can identify these and compare them to modern media narratives that are oftentimes very popular these days, and how that could be seen as a sort of sociologically induced schizophrenia. So let's turn it over to you, Jerry. Let's talk about some of these patterns.
Okay, to go back to what you said a second ago, when I prayed to hear those voices so I could experience what they were like, one of the biggest shocks I got was it sounded just like all the other thousands of voices that go through my head in an average day.
Yep.
I mean, all this at the same, it doesn't sound any different than the rest of my thoughts.
Yep.
What was different was the intent.
Yeah.
So here's a voice that, in my case, that sounded just like all the other thoughts. It didn't sound different in any way, but the intent was that it was trying to get me to panic and drown while I was out in the middle of the lake. Oh, you're too tired to make it back to the shore. The lights are going off. You're going to get disoriented. The motorboat's going to hit you. But it sounded just like all the other thoughts that go through my head in an average day. But the intent was very, very different. It wasn't my intent to even concentrate on that. And all of us get hit by it. Like you could be walking down the sidewalk one day and all of a sudden you get this horrible thought that came out of nowhere that just sends chills up your spine. And for you to go do something, a preacher I know who's probably the most saintly man I know, he was standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon. Very positive guy, very spiritual guy. And here's this voice comes in and goes, "Hey, jump. Why don't you jump?"
Yep.
Stuff like that. We all get hit with those things. That's not your thought. And you intuitively know it's not your thought because it doesn't belong in your thought stream. It's not something you'd normally consider. You wouldn't think about it. You wouldn't, it just doesn't belong there. It's like an invasive thought for you to do something stupid and crazy.
Yeah.
And when it happens at that magnitude, it's much more obvious. But since we're taught to believe that all thoughts are ours, well, that's my thought. What am I doing thinking that? I got to get rid of it. It's like you still own it. And that's what they want you to do, is to own those negative thoughts.
It's a gaslighting technique. It's so perfect because they try and teach you that I'm not the problem, you're the problem. Yeah. You're the problem. You're the problem.
Or somebody else is the problem. It's their fault.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of, shirking the responsibility altogether, or even shirking the acknowledgement that it exists. And I think that people like yourself, who are very much so in their own persona, that's the telltale sign when some other entity has tried to make an influence on you. There's always some resonance capacity, right? So for instance, there could have been a trauma, like you were talking about your dad being a rageaholic. There could have been some instance in your past, say, where you blamed yourself for, getting your dad angry and blah, blah, blah. Anytime where that sympathetic resonance lines up to the predatory sympathetic resonance of that entity, that's why and how, that's the mechanism for how I see them as being able to influence a person. It's always based on these emotional core traumas.
Well, not always. I mean, like
Oh,
the preacher guy I just told you, that was them telling him to jump. He wasn't abused as a child. I mean, it happened. You can't live on this planet and not be attacked by these things. We're being told that we're the top of the pecking order. We're the ultimate. No, we're being preyed upon all the time by these spiritual entities. We're not the top of the predatory order by a long shot.
Yeah.
It hits everybody. It's like when you're sitting around, all of a sudden your arm starts hurting, for no reason. That's an attack. And I go, hey, get out of here. And it fades out.
Yeah. These things are more prevalent than what most modern people
they're around us all the time.
They want to be able to admit. But let's hop in to some of these patterns, because I think that certain of these patterns, certain people might already display, and this can be a very important eye-opening realization to, if you encounter these patterns, this might be a sign that one or more entities could be impacting you, even if there are no diagnoses per se of psychosis or schizophrenia.
Well, these are persistent, repeatable, unswerving patterns. I mean, these happen with the voices all the time. And what I'd like the listeners to do as we go through these is compare them to what the mainstream media is feeding us right now with all their bullcrap. One of the other thing I want to bring out is that if the voices are running these patterns, and like I said, don't believe me, anybody who's working with schizophrenic, check it out for yourself. See it for yourself. They're there. All you got to do is open your eyes and look. The number one pattern is negativity. They are constantly negative. They're telling you bad things about yourself. They're telling you bad things about other people. They're consistently negative, derogatory, insulting, abusive. They may pretend to be helpers or have special powers at first. And if you buy into that, they'll slowly turn on you. So they may come on and tell you, oh yeah, I'm Jesus Christ, or I got special powers and I know stuff that you don't, and they can do that. I've had prisoners tell me that the voices told them, watch out for that guy because he's going to attack you. And, that same afternoon, the guy attacked him. The voices would tell them which houses to rob and when to get out of there. They know stuff that we don't, so they can put that in your head. As we found out earlier, and that they're anti-religious, they're anti-spiritual. They don't want you reading the Bible, and it doesn't matter what religion you're in. Yeah. They don't want you reading religious stuff. They hate the 23rd Psalm. They hate the Lord's Prayer. They hate you going to church. They don't want you reading the Bible. They don't want you moving in any kind of spiritual direction. They're consummate liars. They lie about everything. So, you can't trust anything they say. There's one patient that they told him, if you poke out your eye, we'll go away and we won't ever come back. The guy poked out his eye, and the voices told him, see how stupid you are for listening to us? See, you really are stupid. You're a real dumbass. Look at you now. You're deformed for life. See how stupid you are? And they just went on and you can't trust them with anything. They foster and create negative emotion. Look at what the mainstream media is doing. Are they broadcasting anything? Oh, you're going to die. You're going to get this virus. You got to inject yourself with this horse crap that we're coming up with. 10 million people have died of this virus already, and everybody's being shot all over the world. And we got to take away your gun. Now, do they ever tell you anything positive?
Exactly.
It's all negative, just like the voices.
Yeah.
Because they feed on that negativity, that fear, that guilt, that shame. That's what they're trying to engender. They energetically drain their victims. And look at how people feel after listening to the crap that's being told them on television. Oh, you can't come out of your house. You got to wear a mask and suffocate yourself. You got to keep away from your family. You can't go anywhere. I mean, look at they're draining the life energy of us. They're confining us. Another thing that's interesting is they consistently get louder after sunset. When the sun goes down,
Yes.
and the peak is about 3 a.m.
Yep.
So what they'll do is they'll insert nightmares when the person wakes up, then they'll start attacking you. And in the old folks home, when I was doing psych referrals there, they have something called sundowner syndrome, where these old folks will start getting bizarre after sunset.
True,
They
yeah.
start acting up, they act crazy. The voices get louder when ignored. And that's interesting because all the psychiatrists will say, yeah, they're hallucinations, ignore them. So I remember at the state hospital once, I heard the psychiatrist say that in a session I was sitting in with the psychiatrist and the client. So I just ignore them, just ignore them. So about a week later, I pulled that guy up and I said, well, what happened when you ignore them? Did it work? And he goes, no, it didn't work. They got louder. So I started asking the others, when you try to ignore them, what happens? No, they get louder. You can't ignore them. They get louder. They foster self-destructive behavior. They tell you to do things you normally wouldn't do. Drink that alcohol, take that drug. This friend is talking behind your back. You can't trust anybody. Don't go to work.
Yeah. Jump off the cliff.
Jump off the cliff. And it's all stuff that fosters that negative emotional generation. So they can't produce this energy on their own.
Yeah.
They're an analogy is like they're like what cows are to us. We take the cow, we put them out in the field, they eat the grass, we bring them into the stall, we milk them, take the milk and then send them back out there again, and they keep producing the milk, and we keep bringing them and drain them. That's what these things do to us.
Yep.
We produce the energy, they can't produce it themselves, and they come and they take it away.
Yeah, inducing negativity seems to be the equivalent of putting the cattle out to pasture.
Yeah. It's like milking. That's the milking the grass, and then the milking is the draining of the energy. They foster isolation from yourself, from your family, from everybody. They don't want you trusting anybody. The first thing they go after is the wife, the husband, or the family. They want to break them away and have them isolated. So what you'll find is a lot of schizophrenics cause a whole bunch of consternation in the family, and then they go in the room, they slam the door shut, and they pace in there, and then the family can hear them talking, carrying on these conversations and arguments with some invisible something or other.
Yeah.
So they don't want anybody interfering with what they're doing.
Yeah.
They don't want them helping them at all. They don't want them treating them nicely. They want to destroy the marriages. They want to destroy relationships.
Any other voice but their own, basically. Any other influence but their own.
Right. Any other influence but their own. They constantly demand the attention of their victims. So no matter what the victim is doing, that's why it's so bad for schizophrenics to be isolated, because there's nothing else to occupy their minds except these voices that have taken over their mind. If they go to work and they're concentrating on something else, or have something to do, or a game, or they're, at least for a while, they're diverting their attention to something else. And these things don't want that.
Yeah.
They want the complete attention of the person, no matter what they're doing. And they start playing a game, and then they'll start yelling at them and and trying to grab their attention, like fishermen. It's like baiting a hook and throwing it in there, and they're going to see what works that they'll bite. Well, I had this memory. I wonder if I throw that in his head, will that set him off? Will he start thinking negative? So they'll try that. And if that doesn't work, they'll bait the hook with something else and try that. Or what did he mean by that? When my friend said that, what did he mean by that, really? Wasn't nothing any really good. I mean, what does he mean? And then they'll put the interpretation in there.
Yes.
They're constantly maneuvering for increased control over their victims. And I remember talking to some schizophrenics about what it was like when the voices first came on. they would start off with, hey, go pick up that pencil. And the guy go, what do I mean pick up the pencil? Go sit down in that chair. Hey, walk into the living room and spin 3 times. It was like somebody getting in a new car and seeing how much control they had over it.
Yeah. Wow.
So they're constantly maneuvering for more and more control and to remove as many other influences as possible. So they have complete control with no interference. And like you said, gaslighting. They'll do stuff like, they've done this to me where you skip over a word. I mean, you can read that sentence a million times and you don't see that one word. And you go, something's wrong with this, something's wrong with this. So what they'll do is they'll get something that you put somewhere and they'll have you forget it where you put it. And even though it might be in your view, you gloss over it.
Yeah.
You just don't see it.
Yeah.
And then they'll go, oh, they moved it, they took it. And they'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we took it. And then one time you'll come and then boy, you run right into it. So they change your perception. They can choose what you see and what you don't see, how you interpret things. So it's basically a spiritual takeover. You're fighting for your own mind. They manipulate perception. They can make you wrongly interpret situations, things people say, things that happen. They can manipulate your perception of them. For instance, a schizophrenic might see a police car drive by in his house out front. They're after me. They're watching me. They're spying on me. The phone might. It's always interpreted in the negative, most negative, paranoid
victimized
fashion.
way too.
Yeah, and it fits in. So and then they'll reinforce that. So they create this alternate reality of crap. I mean, it's just negative, nasty stuff. Let me see. Here's somebody who this comment is from a schizophrenic on that thing. She said in a discussion with the entities through the host, ex-husband and random men, the entities made unsupported false statements, which seems to set up verbal scenario to get me to bite on or take their bait, to admit guilt or to go along with them. She said, I used a property management tactic to pin responsibility back on the entity by asking, what's your purpose for doing this? What's the point? When I asked them to state their purpose, the entities either continued to talk in circles or ran away and avoided having to answer that truth. With the foster isolation, she said, I have experienced this in my own marriage. An ex-husband who plotted with the voices help to throw me out. Divorce lawyers are on the front lines fighting with the demons and avoid such cases because they can be so convoluted and nasty. And like we spoke before, they have complete access to your memory.
Yeah.
And what she says about that is, I believe that they were talking into a family line, but they do have access to your memory. Demand the victim not tell others about the presence of the voices. And the voices will actually tell these guys, don't tell anybody because they'll think you're crazy. They'll take you to a psychiatrist and they'll drug you up. They'll lock you up, which is true.
Yeah.
And then when that proves true, they'll go, see, I told you.
It's crazy that what we're seeing here is such a psychotic. It's like literally they could say anything, and if it's a lie and a person succumbs to it, then it's like, see how stupid you are. You're worthless. This is why you need us, and constantly in that angle. Whereas when they do say something that is actually true, like watch out for this guy, he's going to attack you, and then it attacks you. It's like, see, we told you, we're on your side.
Yeah.
And so, like from both angles. And I think that really is very telltale of which type of entity might be in a person's space. Because like you said, sometimes could be ancestors that are actually inside of a person's space because there's so much genetic and similar, sympathy between these two personality types within the same family line. I to be perfectly honest, I think I see that with my dad and his grandfather, who was a severe drunk and had some problems, and my own father, who has been out of body most of my life at any rate, being consumed with alcohol. It's very characteristic of his grandfather's behavior, even down to the fishing and all of the other things that they do during the time that they're intoxicated. That's why when you said at the Columbia Gorge, these entities took him fishing, I was like, oh, that one hits close to home. I can see that behavior perfectly embodied in my own family. So
Yeah, and the secrecy, demand the victim not tell others about their presence. It's like I felt, when I was dealing with these things, they were attacking me, and there was nobody I could talk to about it except other schizophrenics that I was working with. They understood that stuff.
yeah.
But I couldn't go. There was one time with one patient I was working with, where the voices got so mad they caused this loud electrical crackling in my office. And I was stunned, but I couldn't tell anybody about that. The patient heard it.
Yeah.
He said that it was the voices who caused that because they were trying to drive me off. But I couldn't go to my boss and go, hey man, I was working with the schizophrenic and all of a sudden he made my office crackle, and it went all around the office. It lasted for a half minute.
Yeah, before long, you're the patient in that sense.
That's exactly right. So that's the same thing they're doing to these guys. Don't tell anybody, keep us a secret. But the schizophrenics who did tell people, like their family, George, one guy I worked with, he's almost got him beat now. He would tell his family everything, and they accepted him, and the voices hated that. They want you to keep them secret. They don't want you to tell anybody about them. It's like their own little sordid thing.
Well, it's easier to manipulate somebody if there's only one or a limited set of self-destructive narratives. The second that a family member who cares about you tries to offer a different narrative, that gives the opportunity for that person to make choices. And that's what any abusive situation actually thrives on, whether we're talking about domestic abuse or whatever else,
Right.
is that form of isolation. So.
And here's what this gal said about this one, the demand that the voices not tell others about their presence. She said, I was addressing the entities inside me, and I had one stuck in my throat that wouldn't leave. It wasn't speaking, but I could tell it was there. I was in church sitting in a church setting. So I asked someone to order it to leave me in Jesus's name. The voice told me it was going to scream and embarrass me in front of everybody if I asked somebody to ask it to leave. She said, I told it in Jesus' name to leave, and said, I don't care if you scream, I want you out of there. She said before the woman could pray, it left. So she asked this woman to pray in church, tell it to leave, and it's telling her, if she prays, I'm going to scream, and I'm going to embarrass you, and you're going to look like a crazy woman.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of stuff they do. We already talked about the stun by the shock of the rubber band. That's very consistent. The voices are consummate liars. They can't be trusted to keep a bargain on anything.
Yeah.
And if they do, they'll eventually go back on it.
Yeah, exactly. Because once they have earned your trust so that you keep listening to them, there's no reason to keep making bargains. You're already hook, line, and sinker. So, Jerry, this is interesting because like you were talking about, a lot of these methods and a lot of these experiences are being perpetuated a lot by our sociological media. Now, whether this is a deliberate action on
it's deliberate. I mean, look at all these things. This is all coming across from the media, all of it.
Well, I feel you there. I'm just saying, let's be devil's advocates and say, is it possible that the people who are running these media outlets and the servants are also being impacted by these disembodied entities? And
I have no doubt that they are, because
therefore, this is why that information is so prevalent.
Look at the voices get louder when ignored. I mean, you can't, it's coming at you from everywhere. You turn on anything, you turn on your television set, your radio, the news. I mean, it's coming at you. They will not allow you to ignore it unless you seal yourself up in a cave or something, or turn everything off. They steer this next one. They consistently steer their victim away from anything that might generate joy or happiness. I mean, look at I was talking to the therapist in Britain. She said that the government is telling them how they can have sex now.
Yeah.
They have to have it in certain ways. They can't sing in public because it might spread the virus. We have to stay 6 feet apart, isolating you. You have to stay in your house, isolating you. You can't travel, isolating you. You got to have vaccine passports and put this horse crap in you before you're free again. I mean, all these things match exactly what these things are saying.
Yeah, and for the largest part of at least my history and my grandparents' history, these types of sociological methods, techniques have been employed. There's not been a time in history that I think that they haven't been employed, to be perfectly honest. But it seems to be amplified to the largest degree right now, almost in such a way that we could possibly say that it's like an induced schizophrenia that they're shooting for. It's kind of what it seems like in a certain regard. And part of me wonders, have people lost themselves in their connection to their own spirit so much? Again, these entities try and disconnect you from spirit. So have people become so spiritually bankrupt, so to speak, that these types of voices and influences have dominated the scene, and that's what we're seeing as a result of the media? Or is it that there actually are dark people, dark magicians, sorcerers, etc., however you want to refer to it, who are consciously trying to employ these things for control over mankind? I think that a strong case could possibly be made either way.
Oh yeah, I have no doubt. I have no doubt. And like you said, this has been going on forever.
Yeah.
And this idea that all your thoughts are your own has kind of led to this. And then you look at the way we're programmed, focus on the material world. Don't focus on any spiritual anything. You want a bigger car, the American dream, a nice house, a nice car, and nice money. To be successful, you gotta make a lot of money, and you gotta have a good job, and you gotta be programmed by the universities, and the focus is away from spirituality and onto physical material reality, which pulls you further and further away from spirit.
Yeah.
Another one is short circuiting of reason. They cause a knee-jerk reaction, and force you to react in a negative way, like when you fly off the handle and then you get in trouble.
Yeah.
And this gal who's hearing voices, she says, yes, definitely. The victim is the word here. She said the entities work to make victims because it creates the right environment for them to thrive.
Yeah.
I helped a young woman who had been repeatedly raped at her church by her half or stepbrother under her dad, who was the pastor. She was manifesting growling and overt anger. Her issue was not the perpetrator; it was her dad she was angry at. She had forgiven her attacker. I told her she had to forgive her dad for not protecting her, no matter how painful the emotions, which were many. That getting free of that entity's control by getting rid of these negative emotions was most important. She finally forgave, and the demon left her. So that's kind of what you were saying, this crap that's stuck in there that they don't want you to tell anybody about, or to release, or to even talk about, because it's too shameful for you to bring up. Everybody's got that stuff.
Every single person.
And they want you to sit on that and let it fester. And as long as it's fester, they're able to feed on it. That's why when the Bible says forgive, that's why.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the easiest things, actually, to be able to forgive yourself and to be able to forgive others. It takes virtually no energy. It's like, if I'm holding on to this, why can't I let go? Why just focusing on it, you're doing that. Really, forgiveness is that. It's just let go. And so I feel that that's something that absolutely everybody has in their toolbox to be able to do, but it comes with a certain sense of courage too. It has to be coupled with that to be able to address your own trauma, and the courage to forgive and to let go of that as part of your self-identity. But as long as you identify with that trauma, you are undoubtedly, in every single way, indubiously, drawing in entities that are feeding off of that pain and emotion. And that's why emotional sovereignty is such a critical component, I think, too.
And then you become the victim again. Every
again,
time you replay that in your mind, you're the victim again. Oh God darn, he did this to me, and and so
behaviors
you become that
Yeah.
because you keep it alive. And so yeah, forgiveness is incredible, both of yourself
Yeah.
and of the perpetrator.
Yeah.
They move in when the person gets bored. They just, I mean, you can't let a schizophrenic get bored. You got to keep them occupied with something. And that's, I talked to the lady yesterday who got thrown into the psychiatric hospital in Britain. There was nothing to do there. She comes in, she's thrown onto this ward of crazy people. She doesn't know who they are, or what they're going to do, or how they're going to react. The psychiatrist fills her full of drugs and said, okay, go out there. We've determined that you're going to be here for a month. Based on what? Based on what? I asked her, I said, did you threaten anybody? No. I said, did you tell them you were going to try to kill yourself? No. Did you do anything violent or nasty, or did you destroy anything? Did you threaten anybody or anything? No. I said, well, then on what basis did they tell you that you need to be here for a month? And she says, I don't know. It was like raw arrogance. I said, well, how long did they spend evaluating you before they did that? She said, well, about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? These arrogant SOBs,
Yeah.
they see a young, cute girl that's hearing voices, and they look at her after 15 minutes and they go, hey, you got to be here for a month. So it took a month of her life away and drugged her senseless while she was in there, terrified of all these other patients and she said the patients were better for her than the psychiatrist.
Oh, I bet so.
She said, I could relate better to them than I could the psychiatrist. And I asked her, how long did the psychiatrist spend with you when they did see you? Oh, 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's so common.
And that's what I saw too. I asked her, did they tell you anything about the side effects of these drugs before they put you on them? No, they didn't tell her anything other than it may make her groggy and she'll get used to them.
Yep.
And I've seen that over and over and over. These are some of the most dangerous drugs out there. They cause permanent neurological damage with extensive use, and that's exactly what they're doing. You got to be on these drugs for the rest of your life. There's no other treatment. And anybody tries some other treatment, they attack them as hard as they can.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it's a really sad self-perpetuating system too, because you said, well, where'd they come up with the concept of a month? Where'd they come up with that? In
They
my
just
mind,
dreamt it up.
the way that insurance works and other
That's what they could get away. That's what I saw. They kept them there as long as insurance was paying.
That's exactly.
And then when the insurance ran out or started giving them a hard time, we better let this one out.
Exactly.
And it was a big revolving. It was just an insane revolving drug-fueled, pharmaceutically fueled feudal system it just ran round and round and round, and each time fleecing the public and the insurance companies of tens of thousands of dollars with each rotation of the merry-go-round.
Yep.
So they go off their meds because they were awful. They decompensate and they get psychotic again. They take them back to the hospital. They fill them full of meds, tell them to take their meds, and then they go off them again a few months later, and it just went round and round and round. Each time, tens of thousands of dollars for each hospitalization. It's a sham. Nothing is being cured. Nothing is being solved.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's a major aversion to the root cause of the problems. Like, they don't even actually pay attention to these things. In 15 minutes, they talk about the symptoms of what is happening now. If if they had hour or two sessions every day, they could talk about what initially led to this, what backgrounds did they come from. And a trained ear, it doesn't take much time either. A trained ear can listen to certain things or the way that a person talks about something and identify that as a key or a core trauma for that individual and begin to address it on that core level. But there's just not that level of psychological practice there are some great psychologists and some great psychiatrists who are doing things like this. Usually they have to be private practitioners,
yes.
Not necessarily within
exactly
their own, and they're people who get to work with that level are really, really awesome and really rare, and it's a unique experience because
but the overwhelming majority of them don't understand any of this. They don't understand what the voices are. They believe they're hallucinations. And that's what I found when I was working at the state hospital. If the patient found that I believed that the voices were hallucinations, that was it. I was cut off. They
Yep.
wouldn't tell me anything more. So for a while I was going, well, okay, let's just act like they're not hallucinations and listen to them out and ask questions about them. That's when the information started coming in. But the minute they thought that I believed that their voices were hallucinations, that's it. They were done. They weren't telling me anything else.
Yep. Well, and why would they actually? Because
Right.
it's
Because
like,
I'm
oh, you're
done.
just going to invalidate what my actual experience of this
Right.
is, and make
Exactly.
me feel crazier than I already am.
And that's exactly right, because that's what they're telling them. There's hallucinations. You're crazy, and that's the reason you're hearing these things. So actually, they are invalidating their experience.
Yeah.
and saying-
Ironically, anytime.
Yeah, and saying out of infinite arrogance, we are the doctors, we are the psychiatrists, we know everything. What you say doesn't matter to us at all. We know what it is. We were taught in medical school what it is. And these patients are going, you're full of shit.
Yeah.
You don't know shit.
Have you ever had this happen and cured yourself of it? If not, you probably don't have the ability to cure me of it right now. You know, that's.
I doubt that the majority of them have ever taken a Thorazine tab just to see what it's like.
Yeah, that's.
I doubt it. I seriously doubt it. That ought to be a recommendation for every medical school, that these guys got to take the medicine that they're dishing out.
Well,
I doubt seriously that they have done that.
yeah, I think that they would also, come up with reasons to find that that's unsafe for them to do, which is silly. It's like, well, if it's unsafe for you to do it, why would it be totally safe for somebody else to do it?
Yeah, they find some reason to do it. But
Oh, yeah.
it's critical that they understand what these medications feel like.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We're starting to run out of time here, Jerry. Before we go, I want to talk about one last thing. What have you found in your experience to be the most effective at being able to eliminate the conditions that cause schizophrenia? Obviously, we're talking about entities in this regard. Once somebody banishes these entities, presumably they don't have the disease known as schizophrenia anymore. So I'm very hesitant to use the term treatment, because we're not trying to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or illness or condition. But what have you found to be effective in some of the cases that you've seen, or is there anything that you found?
Yeah, there is. One is the realization that not all thoughts are your own. Unless you have that, you can't identify the entity because you think they're you.
Yeah.
So any negative thought about yourself or others that comes into your mind does not belong to you. That's a ground rule. Negative thoughts about yourself or anybody else do not belong to you. The second thing is, not all your thoughts are your own. And the other thing's, move in a positive spiritual direction, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Whatever your religion is, move in a positive spiritual direction. And what I'm thinking, I think a shortcut would be, this will have the answer to that question right there.
Yep, and that's the book published by you and Sherry. Sherry,
Yeah.
you pronounce your last name Sweeney or Swiney?
You call her Swiney and she'll beat you up. I've run into that problem a couple of times, and then she goes, "Why did you let him call me Swiney?
Fair
Sweetie.
enough.
You let him call me Sweetie. Why didn't you stop him from doing that?"
That's hilarious. Well, Sherry, if you're listening to this, I apologize in advance.
No, she will. She listens to them all, where I don't. Once I'm done, I'm done.
Yeah.
And then she tells me where I screw up. So
Yeah.
then I got to go, "I want you to listen to this section." And I got to, "No, I don't want to." "Yeah, you got to do it." So I go and do it. She's right. I screwed up. So and once I do an interview, I rarely ever go back and listen to it again.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear myself talking all the time. It's like, oh my
Yeah,
God,
I do the
I
same
gotta
thing.
get away from myself.
So with that book, now I think it's important just to talk about Sherry for just a second, because you two have worked together now for a considerable length of time.
Oh yeah, like 30 years. Matter of fact, it was when I was in the prison system, and Sherry was running the biggest website for prison reform. And I had developed some programs that they eventually gave me the Arizona Meritorious Service Award for. So here they are beating me up on one end
Yeah.
and giving me this highest
Dignified,
award on
yeah.
the other. So it's like you talk about schizophrenia, you know,
It's inherent
like,
in the system.
and they're full of crap on both ends,
Yeah.
it's like, take your award and shove it.
Yeah.
It's like, but yeah, I worked with Sherry on prison reform. And she was attacking the Arizona system, and I couldn't attack the system I worked with because I was already in enough trouble. I didn't,
Yeah.
I didn't need to be poking him in the eye on top of it. So I would help her attack the Alabama system and say, well, this is how they're thinking. This is how they're going to react. These are the words you can use to make them crazy. Deliberate indifference. They hate that. You use that, they're going to their spine's going to curl up. Because these are what they're being sued for now. And Sherry would take those and she would attack that system with them. And then I'd monitor the progress and we'd fight that system together. So we did that, and that Alabama system, prison system is horrible. It's like medieval Stone Age. It's awful. So I didn't feel bad at helping her at all. But we worked together for 10 years before one day I was talking to her on the phone or something, and I was telling her about a particular schizophrenic and how strange this case was. And said he's hearing voices telling him to do this, and this is really bizarre, and he's acting really strange this way, and I'm not quite sure what's happening in this area of it. And she goes, "Oh, I know about that stuff." And I'm like, "What?" She's probably the most spiritual person I know. And she goes, "Yeah, I know all about the voices." What do you mean? What are you talking about? This is 10 years.
Yeah.
10 years she hadn't mentioned anything. And she goes, "Yeah, I heard them when I was a kid, when I was young. When I was in the Catholic orphanage, I started hearing them." And I'm like blown away. I couldn't believe it. She was the first one I could talk to about this stuff.
Yeah.
So I'd come up with something. I go, "Hey, Sherry, this crazy thing happened." And I'd tell her the situation. I said, "What do you think about this?" And she'd have an opinion on it. She was the only one that I could speak to. I couldn't even speak to my wife. I tell her one or two things happen. She'd go, "Oh, no, you shouldn't be digging into the heads of psychotic killers. What are you going to get hurt? You're going to get killed. Don't I want to hear it. I'm like, "Oh."
Yeah. I can just imagine.
Oh my God. It was like, don't be doing that. And then she would get upset. And then I'd have her on my hands on top of that. It's like, oh my God. So Sherry was like, she was like a lifesaver. So eventually we said, we got to get this out, and we got to get this out to the world. So Sherry told her story in this book. Then you talk about what to do about it and how to recognize it. So we talk about Emanuel Swedenborg in there. We talk about, what psychiatry has done and how awful they have, what an awful track record they have, and how they're just, covering up festering sores and they're not curing anything. So we go into their history, and then we go into what works spiritually and what Swedenborg is saying about the voices and combining. So you're talking to Wilson Van Dusen, who is now dead. So and then you're talking with Emanuel Swedenborg, Sherry, and myself, and I've combined all those people into one consistent message that they're all saying the same thing, and that's the same thing that I've been talking about here with you, but in more depth,
Yeah.
So take a look at that, and that'll answer your question. And then Sherry's That's Alive program on our it's jerrymarzinsky.com. You go there, and under articles is the Sherry's That's Alive program. So people who are hearing voices and realize that these voices are not who they are, you can put that program to work, and you can actually starve these things out with that program alone if you're consistent with it.
Yeah. And like you were saying, if a person has full-blown schizophrenia and is already within the system, using medication so that they first kind of tone down to the point where they can keep focus and drain out some of these extra voices, and then doing the program, that seems to be something that you guys have found to be extremely effective, right?
Yeah, otherwise you can't reach them.
Yeah.
The voices are too loud. They don't want you. You have to, and the voices don't want to be knocked down with those medications. They want the person to get. That's the first thing they attack. As soon as they're put on medications, the voices start. Oh, look how bad you're feeling. Look at now you can't sleep, and now look at how ooky you're feeling, and look at now your sexual dysfunction, and that's the first thing they go after. They want those people off those medications as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But you can't reach a lot of these people unless they are medicated. But to keep them on those medications is poisoning them. You're slowly killing them. You're slowly rotting out their brain. And now they have over 1 million kids on these toxic medications. Can you imagine what that's doing to their brains? Oh, they're a little bit hyperactive. Here, take some Thorazine or take some Mellaril. Or this will calm them down. Yeah, calm them down. It's killing their brains. It's destroying their nervous systems with long-term use. And they're giving them to everybody for everything. It makes me sick.
Me too. So for everybody listening, again, we'll have a link down in the description. The name of Jerry and Sherry's book is called An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower, which I feel is a very appropriate name. And you can also find Jerry at his website, which is jerrymarzinsky.com. Again, we'll have links down in the description so that you can find these things. I'll also include Jerry's bio. And, Jerry, can people in the book find your list of things that we were just kind of discussing on the show about the telltale signs of the voices? And
I think we may have put it on the blog. I'm not sure. Sherry was in charge of that, and then she said, no, you need to learn how to do that. And I hate computer stuff. So I don't know if it made it or not.
Okay, fair enough. Well, you know what? I do know that my listeners would absolutely love to have a list of those. It is very critical. So I don't know if you have the opportunity to, but if you send those to me, that will make it into the description.
Oh, I can do that.
That'll be absolutely fantastic because I know people are going to want these things. And again, if you display any of these particular symptoms within yourself or things that you've noticed, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have schizophrenia. It might, and it will be very characteristic the people around you.
No. Everybody has these things. It's all a matter of degree.
Yes.
The schizophrenics are down there at the
level 11.
Yeah. Low frequency, 5% of the population kind of thing.
Yeah.
But everybody gets hit by these things. There's no human being on this planet that doesn't get hit by these entities because they're everywhere.
And that's why I feel that programs like what you have available are actually so important to people because they help to become aware of the fact that these are voices, that these are entities, that they do not originate within you, and offer techniques, advice, guidance to be able to eliminate these things from affecting you. I think that that's so important for the majority of the population. And once you apply that to yourself on this type of level, the next level is the sociological level, like we were talking about with how the media perpetuates narratives that are not very dissimilar from these self-defeating, very negative internal voices that people end up hearing or responding to. And being able to tune those things out and being able to deal with them on a macrocosmic scale the same way that microcosm is the next step to replace.
Yeah, you look at these violent video games that are putting out now, these Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. I mean, and the war games and the killing the zombies and the violence and the shooting and the blood thing. I mean, that ought to be outlawed. That affects people. That affects young kids. They're training them to be violent.
Hell, it affects adults,
Yeah, that's the goal. And then they go and, oh yeah, this is the way I'm supposed to handle anger or somebody attacking me. I'm supposed to get a gun and go shoot them. And then they try to take away the gun. So it's insane. It's insane. It's just.
It really is. Systemic issues. And I think that if people were less inspired or less influenced by these entities, by having addressed many of their own core traumas and relieving themselves of those sympathies to these other entities, we could see a much happier, healthier society. But it's nobody can do the work but the individual. Individuals have to process their own trauma. Nobody can do it for you. No doctor, they can help. They can help offer guidance. They can show ways that they've handled things and provide inspiration, but they cannot in any way, shape, or form handle it for you. There's no pill that you can take. There's no, ritual that you can do per se that is going to eliminate these things. You have to do it yourself.
And I'm convinced that everybody has, like Swedenborg says, 2 guardian angels watching over them and 2 demonic entities watching over them. And it's just like in the cartoons.
Yeah.
You got two of
Angels
them with the
devils.
angels and devils. And the difference is that the devils can speak to you in your own language.
Yeah.
You know, that's why these things don't manifest before the person has language. So you don't see babies succumbing to this who don't have a command of language. And you don't see a schizophrenic,
That's
for the
amazing.
most part, where the voices are speaking in French or Italian or German or some other language they don't understand, because you have to understand it for them to have the effect.
Yep.
You know, so it's the language.
That's a really fascinating perspective actually on that dynamic. And I've noticed very similar mechanisms actually in my own work. So yeah, that's fantastic. Well, Jerry, alas, we're out of time. We went so much longer actually than what we had
Yeah, that
anticipated.
usually happens.
So I totally appreciate you coming on. We have so much more to talk about. I'm sure that we'll have you on again here in the future.
Well, I have ex-patients who are willing to come on and speak also about what it was like for them, you know, to hear the voices and the struggles they went through. So you're not just hearing it from me,
Yeah,
because
hearing it from
these are the guys that, you know, because the mainstream media and the psychiatrists, they're going to say, oh, he's a lunatic, just like the voices. What a wacko. How did he ever get, how did we ever let him graduate? I mean, it's the same shit as the voices, you know.
Yeah.
But when you hear it from the patient, and patient after patient after patient are telling you the same thing, at this point, I have a handful of people who are willing to come out and speak about what it was like for them to hear the voices, and what it was like to live with them, and what it was like to be thrown on a psych ward, and what it was like to have a psychiatrist listen to them for 5 minutes and throw them out, and, you know, from their perspective.
Yeah.
That's a whole different viewpoint, and I can bring some of those people on.
I think that'd be cool. For those of you who are listening, type down in the comments, make some comments on here if you're interested in hearing an episode like that. I know that I am, but again, you know, we want to cater to, you know, what our listeners are interested in. So be sure to, you know, leave us a comment if you're interested in that. We'll schedule something with Jerry and some of his patients to be talking about these things, because I think that this is one aspect of medicine, and just one aspect of cultural healing, let's say, that really needs to be addressed. We need to stop looking in the same areas that we have been looking since the 1940s in terms of psychological and psychiatric approach, because it is not working. It's a revolving door, and start opening up to new works like Jerry's and incorporating this into our modern sociological paradigm. That's something that I think is absolutely pivotal if we're going to change. Nothing changes if nothing changes. And so we've got to be that change. And for your part, Jerry, thank you so much for all of the time that you put into working with schizophrenic and psychotic populations, learning and extrapolating and being open enough to break through the belief system that these are just, you know, hallucinations and so on and so forth, being open enough and actually listening to the impulses that you had, your own intuition about it, and being able to provide us with information like you do today. It's really important. It's really commendable.
Yeah, there was a period of time where I just couldn't deal with it anymore. It's like, you know, I had all these pieces all over the place, and none of them fit into a complete picture. And it was like, oh, God, I've had enough of this. I have no more schizophrenics. Then I'd move into a job that I didn't have to deal with schizophrenics. And the next thing I'd know, I'd end up back in another job with schizophrenics again. It's like some big hand says, where do you think you're going, buddy?
Yeah,
Get back in there. And I'm like, no, not again, not again. No, let me out.
It's the purpose of your life, though, at least in a large vocational way. You're helping a lot of people. And again, like we were talking about before the break, even if not during the course of your lifetime, in future generations, this is going to be information where people will look back at the work that you and Sherry and others like you are doing and say, this is pivotal. They had already figured this out. They were way ahead of their time. And sometimes it just takes time for people to catch up. So hopefully.
You know what I think? I think I was drunk when I signed up for this. Nobody in their sane mind would sign up for this. 40 years of living in mental institutions and prisons and places where most people would never get into. I mean,
yeah, I'll tell you, yeah, it's really heavy work. And especially if you have any semblance of humanity left. Your heart, your compassion,
Oh, yeah,
your thoughts
yeah.
go towards helping
Yeah.
your patients. So it's got to be just so draining on so many
Yeah,
levels.
you have to harden yourself. I mean,
Yeah.
you can see the worst thing happening in front of you, and you're looking at it like it's a television thing. You can't let it get in because there's just too much negative stuff. You have to have that barrier and look through that barrier and not let it do what you can, but not let it get to you. That's hard sometimes, but it's,
Yeah, I bet. I just even looking at the look on your face as you were saying that, looking off into the distance, it's like you can read circumstances that you're thinking about that
oh,
the words
seen-
can't even describe.
I've seen stuff you just wouldn't freaking believe. I mean, it's just like, it's like the guys in the war, they get the PTSD. And that's how I felt when I got out of prison. I was watching my back. I'd always sit in the restaurants with my back to the wall. I didn't trust anybody. It's like, it was like PTSD, and it lasted for months and months and months until I began to, start trusting people again. Because
Yeah,
you couldn't trust the staff. You couldn't really trust the inmates. There was a very mistrusting atmosphere.
Yeah. absolutely. Yeah, just dealing with all of that would have been crazy, but thank you for your service and for bringing it out and drawing the extrapolations of all of that time and all of the traumatic events that happened to you and to the others into something that we can use today to be more aware of our circumstances, help reclaim our own sovereignty, because I think that that's an absolutely huge component to it. And it also helps us diagram out, like I said, how many different ways external media and other things like that really are negative entities. Whether it's I talk about this all the time, whether you're talking about a commercial entity or a disembodied entity, oftentimes if they have the same type of message, they're going to have the same type of effect. So it's looking at it in a very streamlined way. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this Alchemiculture episode. This was our first chat, hopefully of many, with Jerry Marzinsky. You can get a hold of him at jerrymarzinsky.com. You can order his and Sherry's book. They have a course together. There's all of the details down in the comments section and down in the description section is actually what I meant to say. If you like this episode, please be sure to give us a thumbs up, like, subscribe, hit the bell notification if you're watching on YouTube, and share this with your friends. Getting the word out about our work helps us to continue to provide high-level content like this that is personally, individually, sociologically, ecologically meaningful, and to be able to make this content more available. Again, thank you so much. I'm your host, Phoenix Aurelius, and thank you once again, Jerry, for joining us.
No, you're more than welcome.
All right, everybody, have a good one.